this work? Yeah, it is working. I have to have a microphone because my general tone of voice is pretty low, except occasionally with children. Although those days are thankfully over in terms of trying to get them through this place and a couple of others. It's my pleasure to introduce Paul Scharre. Scharre, he is a Senior Fellow and Director of Technology and National Security Program at the Center for a New American Security, and that is, quite honestly, one of the institutions we would like to engage for internships and those kinds of things for our cadets and civilian students as well who are working in security studies. He is a Senior Fellow and Director of Technology in the National Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. He is the award-winning author of Army of None. Yes, I have read it. Autonomous Weapons and the Future of War. A New Window, which won the 2019 Colby Award and was named one of Bill Gates' top 5 books in 2018. So he's very distinguished and has, I think, a lot to offer to this discussion. From 2008 to 2013, he worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where he played a leading role in establishing policies on unmanned and autonomous systems and emerging weapons technologies. Certainly a topic for consideration today. He led the DoD working group that drafted DoD Directive, Lord knows this number will tell you how many they got, 3000.09, establishing the Department's policies on autonomy and weapons systems. He also led the DoD efforts to establish policies on intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, aka ISR, programs and directed energy technologies. He was involved in drafting the policy guidance for the 2012 Defense Strategic Guidance, the 2010, always wonderful, Quadrennial Defense Review, and Secretary-level planning guidance. His most recent position was Special Assistant to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Prior to joining OSD, he served as a Special Operations Reconnaissance Team Leader, Sergeant Major Mellinger, in the Army's 3rd Ranger Battalion, Fort Benning, Georgia, and completed multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He is a graduate of the Army's Airborne, Ranger, and Sniper Schools, and honor graduate of the 75th Ranger Regiment's Ranger Indoctrination Program, aka RIP. He's probably seen Dahlonega before, but only from a bus on the way to Camp Frank D. Merrill, I suspect. But we'd love to get him back here physically present in our area of operations, should he desire to do so. He has published articles in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, Time, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, Politico, and the National Interest, and has appeared on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, NPR, and the BBC. He has testified before the House and Senate Armed Services Committees and has presented at the United Nations, NATO, the Pentagon, the CIA, and other national security ventures. He is a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations, holds an MA in Political Economy and Public Policy, and a BS in Physics, cum laude. Makes my head hurt just thinking about it. Both from Washington University in St. Louis. All I can say at this point, Paul, is Rangers lead the way, and thank you for being here.
All the way.
Please
Thank
welcome.
you. Thanks for that very kind introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Okay. I see some head nods and some thumbs up. All right. Great. So I'm going to put my job title to the test here as director of the technology program, and see if we can make this remote connection work. I'm going to try to screen share a presentation with you all. So please give a holler if this doesn't come through properly. But I've got some slides that I'd like to go ahead and share with the group, and then I'll walk you through a brief presentation about artificial intelligence. And then we should have some time for Q&A. Can everyone see the slides okay? I'm going to assume that's a yes, and somebody run in and grab me if that's not the case. So what I'd like to do is walk through, in a broad sense, when we talk about artificial intelligence, what is it? Why do we care? and what does it mean for national security and defense? We've seen explosive growth in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning in just the past few years. This recent excitement about AI started about 7 years ago at the dawn of a new revolution in machine learning, coming out of a type of machine learning called deep learning, which uses deep neural networks, that began in 2012 and is really a combination of huge data sets, increases in computing power, all coming together to allow the creation of machines that are able to learn from data and are then able to perform a number of tasks that as good or even better than humans. And you see some examples there. Now, I want to caveat this with the type of AI that we're talking about today is nothing like the AI that we see in science fiction. It's not like Terminators or C-3PO from Star Wars. This is a very narrow or task-specific form of intelligence. That is that we can train machines to perform a variety of tasks as good or better than humans, but they're not able to do anything else. So we have machines engaging in stock trading. We've had machines beat humans at various games like chess, Go, Atari games, computer strategy games like StarCraft. And they're beginning to perform some very interesting and valuable real-world applications, things like diagnosing skin cancer. But the kind of general purpose reasoning that humans have, where humans can drive a car, play a game of chess, engage in a conversation, make a pot of coffee, machines can't do that today. They're able to do one task and really nothing else very valuable. And this intelligence is so narrow that even if the task changes slightly, the performance can drop off dramatically. So to give one example, a few years ago, when the program AlphaGo was trained to beat the top human in the Chinese strategy game Go, it reached superhuman levels of performance by training on millions of moves of Go. But if you change the size of the board slightly, its performance would drop off dramatically, because now the operating conditions were not consistent with the environment in which it was trained on and the data that it was trained on. And so that's a major limitation that we have to factor in when thinking about how to use these machines. Nevertheless, you hear lots of people talking about this technology and its potential to spark something akin to another industrial revolution. And what we're really talking about is a cognitive revolution, as we are able to use machines to imbue them with more intelligence in a variety of settings. And you see, I really like this quote here from Kevin Kelly, who's a technology writer, where he compares AI to electricity being embedded in a variety of objects around us. And over the next several decades, we'll see then AI imbuing these machines with more intelligence, making them more valuable. Just like we've made a whole variety of objects networked, and we've been able to connect things to the network, to the internet, connect our watches and phones and thermostats and cars to the internet. We'll now see all of these machines become more intelligent and able to accomplish more tasks. People are predicting huge dollar amounts in terms of the market for AI technology and creative disruption on the order of tens of trillions of dollars annually that will automate various jobs and tasks. Productivity gains as much as 30% in some industries. And according to the best study I've seen about the impact of automation on the workforce, McKinsey has estimated that roughly half of all tasks currently being done in the US economy could be automated with existing technology. Now, that doesn't mean half of all jobs. It's a very small number of jobs that could be completely eliminated, less than 5%. But most jobs would have some tasks that could be handed over to automation, routine cognitive and physical labor. And there's every reason to think that a similar type of translation function of current tasks over to automation would exist in the national security workforce, in defense, intelligence, homeland security, and other aspects of national security. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. There's lots of companies putting down tremendous amounts of money in this space, investing in AI, investing in data, in computing power, buying up startups that are engaged in this. The market for talent in this space is astonishing. Top tier AI researchers command NFL level salaries. So there's a real hunger for human capital in this space. And you'll notice that not all of these companies are US companies. Some of the major players in this space, Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba, SenseTime, Megvii, a number of these are Chinese companies. And so China is a global powerhouse in AI. This is by no means a US only or even a US led technology revolution. China has stated that their intent is to be the global leader in AI by 2030. And they are engaged in a major national push to achieve that goal. And absent a course correction, they look on track to achieve that over the next decade. So what does this mean for global security? Where the AI revolution is likely to change warfare and international power dynamics just as much as past industrial revolutions did. While prior industrial revolutions led to the creation of machines that were stronger than people for specific tasks, we are seeing today the creation of machines that are smarter than people for specific tasks. These are likely to be purposed for a variety of national security uses in military, intelligence, information, economic warfare. We're already seeing automation play an important role in information warfare and propaganda, as bots are used to spread disinformation on social media. And social media companies themselves use algorithms to filter through information. And we're likely to see increasing new uses of this technology as it evolves. So deep fakes, for example, AI-generated high-quality fake audio and video are one example where we're likely to see more applications of this technology in the information space. More broadly, if we think about AI as something like another industrial revolution, we're likely to see shifts in the balance of power among states and even in the key drivers of global power. So just like the Industrial Revolution made coal and steel production an important indicator of national power and oil a global geostrategic resource, AI is also shifting the key metrics of power, making data, computing power, and human capital also extremely valuable indicators of national power that we're seeing nations compete over and companies as well. Now, some of the features of this technology of AI and automation are that they allow for embedded expertise, which means that you can take tasks that were previously done only by human experts and now embed that knowledge into the machine, allowing then less expert people to be able to conduct the same task. One example of this, and one that we're probably very familiar with, is tax preparation software. You don't have to be a CPA to use tax preparation software. It embeds the knowledge about tax code and filing taxes into that. All you have to do is move through a simple step-by-step interface that asks you questions and you punch in answers. This lowers the barrier to entry for people to be engaged in various tasks in both economic settings, which is a lot of value for productivity gains, but also in the national security sense has benefits and risks. So for example, we've seen small drones today give non-state actors the ability to launch aerial attacks in ways that wouldn't have been possible without this technology. They may not have access to fighter jets or helicopters, but they can buy small drones for a few $100s and then use this to carry out aerial attacks. Automation also allows operations at scale, so people can then scale up the amount of activity that they're doing from one person or individual. We've seen this in cyberspace with things like botnets that spread across the internet and infect unsecured devices, things like Wi-Fi routers or Internet of Things devices, and then allow a widespread internet disruption. We're also seeing this in the physical world with things like drones again, where we've seen non-state groups begin to now use mass drone attacks. There was an attack in Syria last year where a Syrian rebel group used 13 drones against a Russian airbase. And so this ability to scale up the effects from a small group or from individuals has significant effects when we think about national security. Sometimes this technology can allow superhuman abilities. That is to say that we can achieve superhuman performance at some tasks. That's, of course, the goal of self-driving cars, is that someday they will be safer than human drivers and save lives on the road. And automation also allows delegated authority. So people can hand over tasks to machines and allow them to execute these tasks in settings where it might not be feasible for people. Automated stock trading is a good example of this today, where we have algorithms executing trades in milliseconds, and they can do so quite effectively. Now, there are some limitations of these AI systems that I want to highlight for the group that I think are really important. One is their inability to understand context. Because they don't have the same general purpose reasoning ability, they're not necessarily going to be able to understand what they're doing and why. When we have seen, for example, stock trading algorithms engage in erroneous behavior, sometimes in ways that have liquidated assets for companies, or in one case nearly bankrupted a major trading firm, or engage in flash crashes, where the stock market moves very quickly and crashes because of interactions among algorithms. The machines don't understand the context for what they're doing. They don't understand that these dollars are affecting, the economy of a nation or of the entire globe and are disrupting people's lives. They don't understand kind of what any of this means. This can also come into play when we talk about this brittleness of machines and the narrowness of their intelligence, that you could have systems that work very well in one setting, and then in another setting, their performance plummets in really catastrophic ways. We've seen this, for example, with Tesla autopilots, where they can be quite safe in some situations and lure the human drivers into a sense of safety and trusting them. And then quite suddenly, the machine will fail and will attempt to drive into a concrete barrier, a parked car, or semi-trailer, all of which have happened, resulting in accidents and some fatalities. So that can be a real danger of these systems, is that they go from super smart to super dumb in an instant, and in some cases with real catastrophic effects. AI systems also can be vulnerable to new failure modes that can come out of the learning process if they've been given the wrong goals or have faulty data. And they're vulnerable to new forms of hacking or manipulation that might exploit vulnerabilities in the learning system. This is an example of what I mean when I say understanding context. You can see what an AI system can do today. It can identify objects, that there's people here, that they're carrying bags. We see one person is looking at another person. There's an accordion, person sitting on a bench. So it's very good at things like object classification. Understanding what's happening in the picture here and telling a story about what's happening is not something that an AI system can do today. So a person might look at this and say, well, what's going on here? Looks like this guy in the hat is reaching into his pocket. Maybe he's going to pull out some money. Maybe he's going to hand it to the person who's playing the accordion, who's a street musician. The AI system has no ability to sort of tell a story about what's going on. Now, that may evolve over time as the systems become more sophisticated and can incorporate more data, but that certainly is a limitation today. I'm going to skip through some of these. I want to give one example of brittleness, because this is kind of a fun one. This is from Watson on Jeopardy. I'm going to attempt to show a video here, so we'll see if this works. I'm going to cue it up in a second. But this is from when Watson was playing a Jeopardy a few years ago, and it won against some of the top human contestants in the world. And you can see in the video, you'll see on the bottom bars there, what Watson is basically thinking. So that those bars indicate Watson's probability of what it estimates the correct answer is to a given question. So here it's estimating that 1920s is the correct answer with a 57% likelihood. All right, so let's try this video and if this works. We're going to go ahead and give this a shot.
Modern crossword puzzle is published and Oreo cookies are introduced. Ken.
What are the 20s?
No. Watson.
What is 1920s?
No, Ken said that.
Did that work at all? Did people get audio on that? Sort of? Okay. Were you able to hear like, so what's interesting about this is here you have this system that is really good at Jeopardy, but what's the flaw here? Well, it actually Watson can't hear what the other contestants are saying. So I'm not very good at Jeopardy, but once Ken Jennings got that answer wrong, I knew that 1920s was not the right answer. Watson doesn't have the ability to do that. Now, in this case, this was a known limitation of the system. The designers were aware of this problem, and they made a conscious decision that it wasn't worth correcting it. It wasn't worth investing the time in doing so. When asked afterwards why they did that, they said, look, we didn't think that Ken Jennings would get that many questions wrong. And they were right, not a major issue. But this can be a factor in other settings if you see unexpected surprises come up. I want to show another video that illustrates a similar problem. This one is called reward hacking, and it's where a system does what it was told to do, but it turns out to have some unexpected effects. This is from a computer program that was learning to play classic Nintendo games from the 80s, and this is it playing Tetris.
3 points or so when it puts a block on top of another block. So this is really bad greedy planning. And let's fast forward a bit to see how this all ends. It's not good. So now it's almost done, and pauses the game because as soon as he unpauses, he will lose. And really, the only winning move is not to play. Thank you.
So this is a, am I there? Did it come? Okay. So this is a fun example where of this technology, this effect called reward hacking, where this machine does exactly what you told it to do. So in many ways, you can think of, in sort of the military context maybe, a lot of these machines as like a very literal private who will do precisely what you told him or her to do. And so you want to be very careful what instructions you give to the machines, what goals you give them, and allow them to carry out. All right. I want to end with one additional, I'm going to try to pull this screen up one more time, one additional vulnerability that I think is quite interesting that I want to show you. Okay. So one of the challenges here is that AI systems introduce their own vulnerabilities that could be vectors for attacks. So in an adversarial context, which we certainly care about in the national security space, we need to worry about people also attacking and manipulating these systems. So that can occur in a variety of places in a learning process. If people poison the data, they can then basically bake into the learning process vulnerabilities that could be exploited later on the other side. This is particularly an issue if you have systems that are engaging in the real world context with an adversary. So just like you might want to, for humans to kind of habituate enemy forces to certain kinds of activity, to then carry out maybe some kind of deception, you can do that to machines as well. So let's say, for example, that you had AI systems that are used as spam filters for email or filtering out malware, tracking malware. And if they're learning from that, which you want them to, that could be an avenue in which an adversary could introduce vulnerabilities that are then exploited later. Another type of attack, a particularly thorny one, is something called adversarial data attacks or spoofing attacks. Basically what this is people feed into a machine learning system a tailored piece of data that manipulates a vulnerability inside the system. So this isn't during the learning process. This is after it's been trained and it's now put into the real world. So what might this look like? Well, AI systems today are very good at object classification. It's one of the things where 10 years ago, AI systems were terrible at, but by looking at sort of huge data sets of objects, we've been able to train machines to identify different kinds of objects, and they've beaten humans at benchmark tests. Now that's very valuable, but as it turns out, you can create these very tailored kinds of images that you feed into these machines that then trick them, that sort of prey upon what you might think of as optical illusions that the AI system is vulnerable to, that people are not in this case. So here's one kind of fun example of this kind of cognitive hacking. So this is a 3D printed turtle. As you can see as they turn it around, it's a physical object, looks like a turtle, but the AI system is classifying it as a rifle. And you can see on the left side of the screen there, the AI system's classification in real time as it looks at this object. And it's searching through different possible options, but it's quite confident that it's looking at a rifle. Now, what's interesting is, one, the system is generally very good at object classification. This is not an AI system that's bad at identifying images. It knows what turtles look like. It knows what rifles look like. It knows that they're different. It happens that this turtle in particular has been manipulated in a way to trick it. And what's going on is, I tried to pause it there. That didn't work. Hold on. So what you can see here is when they turn the turtle over and you look at the shell, there are some very subtle swirls embedded in the pattern of the shell. You can see them on the top in sort of the pink there, and on the bottom in some kind of weird swirl patterns. They're very subtle. They're not something that would stand out to a person. But these swirl patterns basically are screaming to the AI neural network that this is a rifle. And they're saturating the parts of the neural network that might identify it as a turtle. What's particularly problematic about this kind of attack is that, one, the system does it with a high degree of confidence. It's not like on the fence whether it's turtle or rifle. It's very confident it's a rifle. Two, these can obviously be embedded in ways that are hidden to humans, or that at least are not obvious to humans. And lastly, you don't even need access to the underlying data to make this attack successful. It is better, there's a higher degree of success if you can access the data set that it was trained on, but it still works in a totally black box fashion where you can't access the underlying data. So these are some of the problems when we think about deploying these systems in the real world that are worth being aware of. Just like any technology, there are countermeasures, there are vulnerabilities, there are exploits that we certainly want to think about as we think about real world applications. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and we've got some time for questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Okay, do we have any questions? All right, I'm going to start out then. So in Army of None, Paul, you bring up some of the dilemmas, obviously, that you touched on today, the moral and ethical dilemmas. And one of the experiences that you shared was time with your ranger team on the Afghan-Pakistani border, where your team sees a young girl and she's herding goats, and you have decisions that you have to make. Can you speak to us about that, and then how that applies to some of the things that you laid out as far as how you help AI make the right decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was, in the book, I've recounted an incident early in the war in Afghanistan where I was part of an Army Ranger sniper team up on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. And we infiltrated at night. We ended up in a place that didn't have great cover, and so we were compromised pretty early in the morning when a farmer came out into the fields and saw 8 of us with our heads bobbing out of a rock outcropping not too far away. And we expected to be attacked, but what we didn't anticipate, because this was fairly early in the war and we'd yet to, I think, really foresee some of the tactics that others would use to exploit U.S. rules of engagement, is they sent a little girl to scout out our position. So the little girl came along. She was maybe 5 or 6. She had a couple goats in tow. I think it's cover that she was supposed to be herding goats, but she wasn't very sneaky, to be honest. It was pretty obvious that she was there to watch us. She stared at us while she walked a long circle around us, and we heard the chirping of what we later realized was a radio that she had on her, probably reporting back information about us. So we watched her for a while, and she watched us, and she left. And not long after, some fighters did come. So we took care of them, and then the gunfight that ensued brought up the whole valley. So we had to exfil. But later we were talking what we would do in that same situation. Now, we talked about how we might detain someone if we didn't know if they were a civilian or they were scouting for the enemy. We could pat them down, see if they had a radio on them. Something that didn't come up, that no one suggested at all, was the idea of shooting this little girl. That was not an option that we considered. Now, what's interesting is under the laws of war, in that setting, that would have been legal. Because by scouting for the enemy, she was directly participating in hostilities. The laws of war don't set an age for combatants. And by participating in hostilities, she was a valid and lawful combatant, just the same way as if she'd been an 18-year-old male engaging in that same activity. So if you designed a robot to perfectly comply with the laws of war, it would have shot this little girl. Now, I think that would have been wrong. If not legally, then morally, in that instance. But I think it begs the question of, as we begin to use AI and robotic systems in other settings, how would a machine know the difference between what is legal and what is right? How would you program that into a machine? And certainly when we think about things like autonomous weapons and lethal decision-making, then this technology raises, I think, a host of very challenging legal and ethical questions.
Questions? Okay, then Paul, I'm going to ask you another question, and then we'll.
Oh, I see a
bring it
couple
over.
hands in the back there behind you.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Paul. Charlie Dunlap. I got to ask you.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. I'm sorry you're not here, but you are here, I suppose. Your avatar on the screen. What did you think of the new DoD Defense Innovation Board AI ethics thing? You know what I'm talking about? Just came out.
Yeah, right. So for the group, so the Defense Innovation Board recently released a set of AI ethics principles. This was, largely in response to some of the controversy surrounding DoD's use of AI in Project Maven, and having some tech employees at Google, at Microsoft, at Amazon, really sort of standing up and being critical of what DoD is doing with AI and raising some questions about kind of where this is going. I think that the AI principles largely do what that they needed to do, which was set out a broad set of guiding principles for how the department should approach AI technology, acknowledging to some of the communities who are concerned about this, that DoD cares about operating responsibly, using the technology in the right way, operates in a manner that's legal and ethical, and understands some of the particular vulnerabilities of AI technology, whether it's that it's subject to bias, to failures, the importance of test and evaluation to get reliable behavior and other things. I think one could easily quibble with elements of it and some of the wordsmithing. I mean, I think there's elements of it that I'm not crazy about. I think it's probably 80% in the right space. But more importantly, I think it does fill a gap for the department where people could fairly criticize DoD, I think, and the DoD was moving out with AI technology with programs like Maven and the Joint AI Center, and hadn't really articulated a high-level vision for where it wanted to go. And now these principles do that. They acknowledge some of the concerns that people have about AI technology. It acknowledges that humans will be responsible for the technology and making sure that humans are always sort of at a high level, responsible and in control. I think for people who are opposed to the DoD using AI at all, it's not going to answer the mail for them. It's not going to satisfy them. For people who want DoD to, sign on to a treaty banning autonomous weapons, or to say that there's some things that are going to rule out entirely, they're not going to be satisfied. The range of objections that came out of tech employees hit a whole bunch of different things. Some people were worried about drones. Other people didn't like the military. Other people, they were just like, well, I'm not American. Maybe I'm from another country, and I don't want to do something that supports U.S. national security. Okay, fair enough. But needless to say, you're not going to convince DoD of those ideas, right? So I think ultimately the principles, are headed in the right direction, articulate kind of some sensible, sort of broad guidance, give a tremendous amount of flexibility for DoD about how it actually carries forward with that. And ultimately, they give some top cover for tech company leadership that wants to engage with DoD and can say, look, the DoD is thinking responsibly about this.
Paul, Billy Wells, my question to you is this. You listed a number of limitations of AI. How quickly do you think those limitations are going to be overcome? And at some point, what is the end state, if there is one?
Right. So I want to answer this roundabout way, which is, there were lots of debates in the 1920s about the role of the tank in the Army and in ground warfare. And you had debates on either side about what you might do with tanks and how good were tanks. And in fairness, like tanks at the time were a new technology. They had a lot of limitations. It was still developing in different ways. Some of the objections were compared to horses, that tanks, required bigger supply chains. Horses could eat off the land. Tanks required fuel. They were very maintenance heavy. They would break down. What's interesting is all of those things are still true today. Those are very real limitations of armor. It just so happens that the benefits outweigh those limitations. I think some of these we'll see. It's hard to know. Some of these things we are likely to get a better sense as the technology matures about things like reliability. But there are likely to still be failures, particularly in novel situations. I think one important illustrative example of the limitations of safety and reliability come out of the commercial airline industry, where there's no question that commercial airline autopilots have dramatically increased airline safety over the past several decades, but we still see accidents like the MCAS and the 737 MAX, where we had a new type of automation that hadn't been used before. It ends up through the process of development getting sort of used in a way that was not really the way it was intended. And even though you have a very highly regulated industry that's very concerned about safety, you still have, accidents that lead to, a huge number of fatalities with these plane crashes. And so I think we need to be, acknowledge that that's going to happen. Some of these problems look very, very difficult to fix. So for example, one of the concerns that people have with AI systems is sort of the opacity of neural networks. Because they're learning from data, there's not like an easy way to go back and peel back the network afterwards and say, well, why did it make this decision? There's not a simple sort of if-then set of statements that could explain its behavior the way you may have, for example, like an airplane autopilot. That may not be the case in a learning system. So this problem of explainability seems like a particularly challenging one. People are working on it, but it could be, we don't know, right? It could be that 10 years from now, we have AI systems that are really explainable and people are very happy. It also could be that the most powerful systems are super weird and incomprehensible, and we actually have to choose between high-performing systems that are largely opaque to us but work, and simpler explainable systems that are less effective. That's a high degree of uncertainty. I'd say similarly, these adversarial examples, these spoofing attacks that I talked about, right now, it's very hard to defend against these, but it's a very active area of research. And so we could see, that in the next 5 years, it's possible that we end up with much more robust systems that are robust against these kinds of attacks. I think it's hard to know, And some of these vulnerabilities might be showstoppers for certain applications where you say, like, I can't use it in this case. In other cases, we may find ways to work around that and manage that. I think the most important thing is that we're just cognizant of the limitations of the technology. And so we're using it in a way that we're not surprised by these vulnerabilities in some operational setting where there might be then high consequences.
Okay, we've got one more question.
Hey, Paul, it's Emerson Brooking.
Hey,
I
how you
had a
doing?
question about the AI arms race. So one of the big bottlenecks we face now is basically the size of a training set and training data. The United States, we have privacy regulations. We have a number of obstacles that might limit the size of that training set, those training sets. China doesn't face those same privacy regulations when they're trying to accumulate these massive training data sets. We also face a number of challenges regarding the integration of Silicon Valley with the US Defense Department. China doesn't face those same obstacles. So I'm wondering if autocracies are kind of privileged in this AI arms race, and is there anything we can do to overcome that?
Yeah, I think, there are probably some ways in which China or autocracies in general have some advantages, but I think there are other places where the U.S. or other democracies will have major advantages. And I think the two issues that you raised in particular, these come up a lot. I think there's some validity to them, but they're often a little bit overstated. So on data, these machine learning systems, as you're well aware, but kind of for the group, they feed on large amounts of data. So if you want to train, for example, a neural network how to identify objects, it's not enough to have like a picture of the object, of a cat or a rifle or a tank or whatever you need to do. You actually need like thousands of images from various angles and various settings, and then these images are fed into this neural network that then learns from them. So having large data sets is really valuable and important in training these systems. Now, one of the concerns that people have raised is that this sort of rules of data protection that exist here in the United States, and certainly the norms against government collection of private data, don't exist in China and are not a factor there. There's obviously some element of truth to that there are hugely different political systems, and there are checks and balances in the government here that just don't exist in China. On the other hand, a couple limitations that are worth pointing out. One is that there is, of course, massive collection of personal data by companies here in the U.S. that's largely unregulated, that's proceeding apace despite a lot of public outcry and consternation. The government has sort of flailed about with congressional hearings and angst and statements from lawmakers, but we don't seem to be on the path towards any kind of comprehensive data privacy regulation. And consumers individually seem unable to manage where their personal data gets sucked up into and how it gets used. So there is at least rampant use by companies here. In China, you do see some interest in data privacy in the consumer side. That's not a conversation from the government, but certainly from the consumer side that is an issue. It's also the case that data is not fungible across different tasks. So, data on like geolocation of people that might be that companies suck out of people's cell phones, that's not going to be helpful in like some national security context. The data needs to be very task specific. And so there might be some places where China ends up having a huge edge because of their ability to collect large amounts of data. I think facial recognition is likely to be one example of this, where you see Chinese companies who are already really leaders in facial recognition continue to push that lead because they're able to engage in facial recognition applications in China that are just not the case here in the US. And there's already mass sort of government-funded surveillance underway. Is that, might that help to boost the AI industry as a whole? Sure, but that's not necessarily going to apply in other settings. And facial recognition itself is even very brittle across like skin tone and gender. So, for example, a database of hundreds of millions of Chinese people is not necessarily going to be effective against Caucasians or Africans or people with other skin tones. And that's something that's come up quite a bit with facial recognition technology. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that over time we see a general trend of computing power is starting to sort of supplement or replace data in some contexts, where synthetic data is able to sort of allow people to get by on shorter, smaller data sets. The last thing, and I realize we're out of time, but I'll make a brief comment about kind of the civil-military connection, because I think this issue of military-civil fusion, this Chinese concept, has gotten a lot of attention here in the U.S. Certainly, the political obstacles that we've seen here in the U.S., where tech employees are saying, we don't want to work with the DoD, that doesn't exist in China. Even if private individuals felt that way about the government, they certainly can't stand up and say that. They can't write open letters. If they get on WeChat and they start making anti-government statements, the police are going to come pay them a visit. So that's that's an important difference. On the other hand, there are important other barriers to non-traditional companies working with the Defense Department here in the U.S. and working with the PLA in China that exist on both sides. And I think those are probably, at least in the U.S. side, are much bigger actual obstacles to cooperation. We've seen that these major tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they actually want to work with DoD, and they're sort of moving through some of the friction that are coming out of some of their employees, but it certainly hasn't stopped. Microsoft and Amazon from bidding on Jedi, hasn't stopped Google from now trying to get back into some defense work. And I'm much more concerned, quite frankly, about barriers that we have within the Defense Department, bureaucratic red tape, moving too slowly, lower profit margins, the inability to scale startups to larger sizes. I think these are much bigger obstacles to DoD actually accessing this technology.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much for your comments. It was amazing. We still want to get you up here physically, but if we could give him a hand.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay, for those of you who like schedules,
Take care.
Development, because that's where we're going to find our solutions. And so our panel moderator, sitting in the center there, is a Colonel retired Jim Solomon, U.S. Army retired, and currently the CEO and co-founder of Chambers Bay Institute. Following his leader development studies at the University of North Georgia, Jim was commissioned and advanced in his Army career to the rank of colonel with global responsibilities. He then went on to hold numerous leadership positions within Fortune 500 corporations, privately owned companies, and entrepreneurial startups. His spirit of service attracted him to volunteer on various nonprofit boards, where he has served as committee chair and chairman of one of the largest senior living communities in the state of Texas. As a leadership coach, consultant, and author, Jim continues to demonstrate his commitment to developing capable leaders for future generations. Jim's leadership philosophy is simple. It's all about we and not me. So we welcome Jim and thank him for coming from San Antonio.
Thank you. That all about we, not me, comes from these hills here in Georgia. So it's great to be back in Dahlonega. The team here is going to talk about something that's really important, and that's the future of leader development. We've explored what this thing about AI is, sort of with a lot of different opinions this morning, a little bit this afternoon. But what are we going to do? How are we going to develop these leaders of the future? And so starting things off is a great graduate of this institution. Joe is sitting somewhere from the Green Notebook. And if you were in the Army back a few years ago and you were a lieutenant or you were a sergeant, you carried a little green notebook in your pocket, and it had all the information about everything and anything that you wanted to know and need to know about your soldiers. And I suspect, Joe, this is where you got your title. Have at it, Joe.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
All right. Hey, is Colonel Wells, Dr. Wells, is he out there?
He just stepped out.
All right, well, good. And I'm going to tell a story about him real quick. But before I get started, my junior year, I was going in front of a board with the Commandant of Cadets at the time, Colonel Tom Palmer, and I was interviewing for the cadet commander of the Corps of Cadets there, and he pulled out a counseling statement from my freshman year, and it said that Joe did not like the military, he didn't like the discipline following orders, and that he was planning to disenroll from North Georgia the very next semester and go to a civilian university. And so Colonel Palmer asked me what changed. And so I told him that I had seen the light, that I decided to dedicate my life to military service. But that was a lie. And I want to come clean here today. I was actually, at the time, I was dating Colonel Wells' daughter and told her that I was leaving North Georgia for those reasons. And she called me a wuss. So in addition to thanking Colonel Wells for the invite today, I'd like to thank him and his family for my degree from North Georgia and the last 16 years of my military service. So I'd like to start my comments today with just letting you know where I'm coming from. The points I have to make weren't developed in a classroom earning an advanced degree. They weren't epiphanies I gained from a training center after a training center rotation. They come from a place of practical experience, from leading soldiers in actual combat and through hardships that life presents us back here stateside. And then they come from spending the last 2 years traveling to places such as Somalia, Yemen, Northeast Syria, and then here in Afghanistan. And from watching senior level leaders wrestle with tough decisions that many of us will never have to make in our lifetime. And so, and finally, they come from a place of dedication. I've dedicated the last 6 years of my military career to reading, writing, and sharing my lessons with others. So I just want to make those comments up front. As we move up in rank and responsibility in the military, we continually face new terrain in terms of leadership experiences, new organizations, and just the day-to-day dilemmas. We will meet, lead, and be led by an array of personalities who all have different motivations. And for those who experience combat at the tactical level, each patrol or mission represents a complex challenge. And in places like Afghanistan, where I'm currently sitting, where we're competing in the information space every single day while working towards a political settlement, we continually encounter new terrain. And so the one constant across all these experiences is the factor of time. We only have so much time to make a good first impression. We only have so much time before those we lead or those that we're following lose confidence in us. And we only have so much time to make tough decisions in combat. And in a place like Afghanistan, where, what I'm watching all the time are leaders making decisions impacted by all sorts of clocks, election cycles, deployment cycles, peace negotiations, and political will. So I can only imagine that this time requirement for leaders to be decisive, to show good judgment, and to exploit opportunities will become even narrower with the proliferation of artificial intelligence. So I've been looking at it, and I wonder, how do we as leaders gain a competitive advantage when new tech might speed up our clocks? And what I've learned is that we gain a competitive advantage by relying on one of the oldest and proven technologies, which is the written word. So I'd like to talk about 3 lessons I've learned through my military career, through both reading and reflection. I've learned that reading helps us enrich our mental models, which speeds up our ability to react to circumstances. If you're not familiar with it, mental models are the lenses through which we view the world, and they're developed through a lifetime of personal experiences and education. Once stored in our brains, they help us quickly understand the world and influence the actions we take. Mental models are the reason two individuals, say a commander who only relies on the experiences they've gained through training and a commander who supplements those experiences with reading and reflection, can look at the same problem and draw two very different conclusions. And the types and variances of experiences and how we make sense of them determine how our mental models are shaped. And it's important to remember that our models are only as good as the inputs. If we fail to feed our brain with varied experiences and quality literature, then our models will be limited in scope. The second lesson I've learned is the cumulative value of investing small amounts of time in self-study over a long period of time. When I graduated North Georgia, and it was 4.5, 5 years, I can't exactly remember. I was glad to get out of college where I didn't have to pick up another book. And it took me a while before I saw the value in professional reading. So in 2013, when I started reading history and leadership books consistently, I became a walking Google. Like I wasn't that great with the details, but I knew which books to find the passages I was looking for. And after my second year, I began making connections. When I encountered a problem at work, my solution was informed by the vicarious experiences of other leaders or through theories I gained through reading. Eventually, after a steady effort, I started developing my own ideas, and they were a combination of knowledge captured from several books and articles, as well as reflections from past experiences. But the important thing here is that none of this happened overnight or from reading just a book or two, but it was through a consistent investment of small chunks of time and the habit of self-study. And so throughout history, many of our greatest battlefield commanders and strategists also saw the value of reading. For example, in The Prince, Machiavelli wrote that he valued the knowledge of actions of great men learned by me from long experience of modern things and the continuous reading of ancient ones. We can't have a military conference without bringing up Karl von Clausewitz. So the 19th century theorist, he talked about this inner eye, the ability to quickly appraise a battlefield's terrain as a prerequisite to military genius. And he wrote that the study of war is meant to educate the mind of the future commander, or more accurately, to guide him in his self-education, not accompany him on the battlefield. And George Washington, our first commander, he had never led a large formation before he took command of the Continental Army. But he bought every military science and history book he could get his hands on, and the notes that he wrote in the margin, he eventually turned into orders. General George Patton, he took extensive notes on Frederick the Great, Napoleon Bonaparte, Ardent Dupik, and von Moltke, studying not only their successes, but also their failures. And we saw these margin notes come to life on the battlefields of Europe during World War II. And every day out here, I get to watch a commander who has supplemented his vast experiences in combat with a lifelong dedication to self-study. And he runs circles around those who haven't made a similar investment. Finally, the last lesson I've learned is that tech may change, but people don't. One of my old bosses, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, used to say that people fight today for the same fundamental reasons that the Greek historian Thucydides identified nearly 2,500 years ago: fear, honor, and interest. And the same qualities that Hannibal displayed to motivate the Carthaginians in fighting the Romans are the same things that motivate people in the 21st century. So we can build a repertoire of secondhand experiences from which we call upon to use to inform our vision, our actions, and our responses. Because people haven't changed that much in 1,000 years, reading helps us identify familiar patterns of activity. And instead of starting from scratch and learning through trial and error, which takes time, a prior study of previous experiences enables us to start where history leaves off, rapidly identify opportunities, and quickly seize, retain, and exploit the initiative. Now, I opened talking about the number of times we encounter new terrain in our careers. And I think there's a great illustrative example that we experienced during our pre-commissioning education, and that's night land navigation. When I think back to the first time I did night land nav, I remember feeling very anxious, and my movements were slow because I couldn't see that well. I was worried what others would think about me if I didn't find my points, and I felt like I was operating degraded in the unknown. And I remember there were two factors that always helped me moving forward. The first was either I had familiarity with the terrain. I'd been over it multiple times, so when it came to night land nav, I could move a little bit faster. And the second one was that there was enough illumination that where I had some idea of where I was headed. So the way I see it is we have a choice. We can approach this continual new terrain and new technologies like night land navigation for the first time, stumbling through it, moving slowly, or we can invest in our own development and provide ourselves with the just enough illumination where we can react a bit faster, make out the dominant terrain, and give ourselves a competitive advantage. So thank you very much for your time.
So Joe, I understand you have to leave in a minute, but maybe if there's any questions right now that we could pose to you before you have to get back to work? Are there any questions we could raise to Joe?
It being 11:30 at night there.
Joe, Charlie.
If there's one I don't want to answer, I'll just go.
There you go.
What are the top 2 or 3 books that you recommend?
There's a book that's called History in the Military Profession. That's the first one. It's a series of 12 essays that I read when I was a captain that basically lay out why history is important. And the reason why I think this book is important because it introduces so many different texts, and the footnotes alone are worth reading. So that's number one. The second book is called The Last Place on Earth, and it's one of my favorites. And I look at it as the counter book to Once an Eagle, which I know that General Scales is a huge fan of. But The Last Place on Earth follows 2 polar explorers in the early 1900s racing to the South Pole. One is Roald Amundsen. This guy, he spends his entire life studying polar travel and studying human nature. And so he leads his team, and I want to say it's either 1,800 or 3,000 miles. It's something crazy, on foot with dogs to the South Pole to be the first ones there. The other team, led by Sir Falcon Scott. Sir Falcon Scott was only interested in promotion and his advancement in the Navy, and so he didn't dedicate the time that Roald Amundsen did. And so, unfortunately, his team didn't make it. None of them did. And so, the book "The Last Place on Earth" is a comparative study of their 2 styles and the preparation they did. But it's a great book about leadership in extreme situations, about dealing with friction, and there's a lot of applicable lessons to those serving in the military. So those are just 2 of my favorite ones.
So Joe, we want to thank you. I think I told you in the email I share your blog post with the graduate leadership courses that I teach, and get a lot of great feedback. So again, from the Green Notebook, an amazing thing for someone actively engaged in being in the Army, being a successful officer, but on the side giving back. And so we really appreciate that.
Thank you very much for the time.
We'll see you on the high ground. Sort of interesting that when General Milley was here talking to the cadets, one of the things he talked about was reading. And he said that he sort of had an important and busy job, but he talked about the thousands of pages that he read every month. And if you connect the dots, General Scales talked about his personal library. If you take a look at General Mattis, his personal library, if you take a look at smart leaders all around us, this idea of reading is just an incredible thing that we all must do at all times. So thanks again, Joe. All right. See if we can get some slides up here. There we go. Well, that was a great introduction to talking about the area of leader development. You know, I truly believe that great leaders lead change. That is, they don't simply react to it, but they create it. As we move further into this age of artificial intelligence, what we found is that leaders really are evolving into what we call integrator leaders. An integrator leader focuses on creating key intent, compelling rationale, and is guided by some guidelines that I'll mention in a minute, but they use or leverage artificial intelligence really to expand the reach or the capability of the knowledge worker. My approach is from both business and from the military, because my background is from both, but I think it all applies to what we're talking about here today. You know, as we move further into this, what we see is as this knowledge worker is able to spend less time with the mechanics of managing people and less time managing data, they can become more strategic, which is what the leader needs to be. And with that, the leader then can spend time on innovation and integrating the efforts of specialized, complex teams throughout the organization. So I think I'm flipping the slides here, see if I can do this. There we go. Am I doing this? Are you doing this? You doing it? Okay, I got it. Great. Let me tell you real quick where I come from. So my foundation of leadership came from North Georgia, a great place to begin your leadership journey. From there, spent a career in the Army, and you think you know some things about leadership. I went into business and found out there's many things that you don't know because organizations are complex. And so over the last many years through our organization, Chambers Bay Institute, we've had the privilege of working with over 7,000 leaders from government, military, nonprofit, and corporate organizations. And in the last 3 years, we've spent time working with about 2,300 leaders, again, from all those 4 sectors. But what these leaders are very interested in is this idea of artificial intelligence. Some are already involved with it, and those that aren't are looking at it. And so this focus is really clear, very clear. All of the folks on our team started out as practitioners, though many of them are academics. My business partner's the smart guy, he's the PhD, and I'm a graduate of North Georgia College. And, but together, we bring together our practitioner capabilities and experiences and use that in the research and look that we've done with all these different leaders. How we doing there? Hard to see. There we go. Okay. So in this age of artificial intelligence, leaders are going to have to build coalitions. They're going to have to build coalitions of people in a very complex world. The leader's job is really to influence and integrate. They've got to operate from the helm. They can't be operating from the engine room. And they've got to be able to separate what and how. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. And the other thing that's been mentioned today is the leaders have got to be able to see patterns. They've got to be able to see patterns through thoughts and ideas, and they've got to be able to get their team, the folks within their organization, to be able to see these same patterns of ideas, because that is the future. Now, to be able to change the world, you've got to be able to really see the world in a new way. And we see this as really a key thing that we do with leaders, and that's helping them to see in new ways. See through their customers' eyes, see through the organization's eyes, and see through their team's eyes. And so often what we find is organizations and individuals within teams do things because they've always done it that way. And when you ask them, well, why do you do it that way? They've got good answers. Because that's the way we do it. Well, we've got to be able to break out of that, and we call that being stuck in the prison of the known. So leaders in the age of artificial intelligence need to be able to release the shackles of their teams and their organization to be able to expand their minds to look at things in new ways. As we talked today a little bit earlier, we talked about the biases. As these algorithms are being developed, how are they being developed? Are they being developed with things that we already know? So being able to look and see and explore and listen in new ways is certainly key. We've, over years, developed this thing that we call the change integrator, and it's really a way for leaders and teams to be able to think. And if you look at it, you see purpose at the top and people and process on either side with a loop going around it. And we say the leader's responsibility is purpose. The leader has got to develop the what and the why. You've got to be able to really define that. What first, and then a compelling rationale as to why. And that's what's going to cause the team to be committed to do whatever they're supposed to be able to do. Once the leader's been able to provide that, then their responsibility is to be able to bring the team and get them engaged to develop the how. So often we find organizations when they get a mission or a tasker or they're asked to lead a change effort, the first thing the team wants to do is they want to jump into, how are we going to do it? Can't get there that way. We've got to first develop that what and the why, and then get the team to get engaged. You'll see that feedback loop, and we're going to talk, the team's going to talk about feedback here in just a little bit, but I'm going to talk about feedback just a minute in our model, and this shows this loop being continuous. It goes from the top to the bottom and from the bottom up. But most importantly, it grows across as well, within internal teams as well as external teams. The idea of feedback and communications is just critical. And what we're finding is that though there's all sorts of ways to communicate today, the idea of the voice communication, face-to-face is best, but voice communication is certainly number two. The idea of text and email and everything else, you just don't feel committed to anybody by that. You can very easily turn people off or say no or defend certain things that maybe you just really don't want to do. And so the idea of this human communication is certainly key. So we say first what, then why, and finally how, with that clear rationale. Now, I talked about providing the clear intent and the rationale, and we've got 6 key guidelines or principles that we think are important. And the first one sounds sort of funny, you know, work yourself out of your job. But what we mean here is you can't be indispensable. The leader that finds themselves as being indispensable is a single point of failure. You've got to be able to spread and share that information throughout your team. This second one, the idea of integrated solutions. If your team is fragmented, how can you develop solid solutions for your customers or for the folks that you're trying to support? You can't. Your team has got to be completely integrated itself, and so you certainly have to look at that. We talk about focus on outcomes versus input. I can guarantee you customers could care less what your input is. All they want is the solution. Whether you're supporting the instrument on the battlefield or whether you're supporting an organization out in the commercial sector, all they want are solutions. And so often, folks will really look at things and they'll ask themselves, well, are we doing the job right? And they'll look at metrics and all sorts of other things, and what do they find? Metrics looks pretty good. We're doing the job right. But maybe the real question is, are you doing the right job? As we learn to look in a new way, as we look at and continue to analyze things, we can't continually follow SOPs. We've got to analyze those SOPs as well. The fourth one is this from command and control to strategic intent. And, you know, this whole idea of salute and obey is out. The idea of commitment is in. I can teach my dog Spot to obey all day long, but this idea of commitment is something else. This authentic leader has got to be able to get their team embedded and own the situation, own the organization, own the solution. See if I can see this one here. The whole systems perspective. We talked about whole systems earlier today as well, and the idea of looking at things in this whole systems perspective. Oftentimes, folks just get in their little cubicle or down on what we call the jungle floor, and all they can see around them is just what they can see around them. You really need to be able to take your team up and have them look at a strategic look so they understand where the organization's going and what part do they actually play in it. And then the last guideline we talk about is ask, don't tell. As often as you can, as a leader, you need to ask your team. If you're not surrounded by smart people, why are they on your team? You know, you've got to sort of look at that. And so even Peter Drucker said a number of years ago, the leader of the past certainly needs to know how to tell, but the leader of the future needs to know how to ask. And that is where you get commitment and buy-in from your team. Now, the knowledge worker certainly will rise, and unlike the industrial age, when we had the industrial worker that was there, the knowledge worker is quite different. These individuals are independent, they want to be smart, they want to contribute to something, and they're not stuck to getting the gold watch after 20 years. They want to contribute, they want to continue to move and continue to move around, and they know more and more about less and less. And so the idea of being able to integrate this crowd into your organization and make sure that they understand the strategic intent is highly critical. And so many leaders are concerned about this. Some of my people know more about this than I do. Well, what I say is if I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm probably in the wrong room. I want smart people on my team. I want people to understand what's going on. But as a leader, you can bring this team together and organize that and integrate and influence them for the right solution. Now, welcome to the VUCA world, and this changes everything. Now, VUCA is not a new term. In fact, General Scales, when he was back at the War College, and either General Ivney was just before or just after you someplace in there, General Bob Ivney, he talked about this quite a bit. But this idea of VUCA threats is been out there for a while, and people plan for threats all the time. And that's okay. You've got to be able to plan for that. But you also have to be agile and you have to be adaptable because you can't plan for everything. And so your organization has got to be able to buy in and thrive in this idea of VUCA threats. They've got to be able to understand that this is the norm. Well, I circle back around to this slide I showed you before because really this is how you see in new ways. First what, then why, and bring your team in as often as you can to help develop the how, but critical to all of that is the idea of feedback. And as we look at this age of artificial intelligence, again, this leader's got to be the one that's driving innovation, the one that's got to be able to provide that strategic look, and is be able to get their team to be able to see in new ways. So with that, I'd like to move on to our next team, and we're really fortunate to have folks from the second best military training academy in the country from West Point. Of course, North Georgia's the best, but we're really pleased. Just kidding here, since I'm outnumbered, I think, on the panel. But we're so pleased to have Colonel Tina Hartley, who's a professor and at United States Military Academy and head of the Department of Mathematics Sciences at West Point, and along with her, Dr. Rebecca Jones Kellogg, who's Associate Dean for Curriculum and Assessment at the United States Military Academy. So, ladies.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm Tina Hartley. What we're going to talk to you about today is some of the things that we're thinking about at West Point for how our curriculum and pedagogy needs to develop to help prepare our cadets to lead in the age of AI. So this is our academic or overarching academic program goal. We strive towards this goal through a curriculum that consists of 28 to 30 core or required courses for all cadets, and those are balanced between STEM and humanities. And then on top of that, each cadet chooses a major from amongst a wide array of disciplines to try to give them some disciplinary depth in a particular area. So what we're going to talk about specifically is some questions that we think that we've been struggling with, I guess, as we modify our curriculum, make some changes, think about what we need to do going forward, and then highlight a few specific examples of some things that are going on right now. Okay, so these are two areas I think that are really relevant to our discussions today. And the first is this idea of tech savviness. And so this doesn't mean that every officer needs to be a technical expert, but we do think it means that every officer needs to have some degree of technical literacy. And so some questions that arise with that: one, the ability to lead human-machine teams, and this is a topic that's been discussed several times today already. But where we see leaders involved in this is redesigning organizations to optimize the mix of these. And so there's lots of studies out there that show some issues that can arise if you don't get this mix correct. One study talks about that if humans and machines are used correctly, the humans will have affectionate names for the robots and give them the strenuous or arduous tasks to relieve that from themselves. And so that's a good interactive mix. In other cases, you see workers that will sabotage robots because they're afraid of losing their jobs. Another study that we've seen involves when you have humans and machines doing the same tasks, the humans suffer notably in terms of their self-esteem and their performance declines because robots clearly will perform things more efficiently. So finding that right mix of what the humans do and what the machines do in an organization is something that leaders need to be able to think about. The second area is understanding technology enough to be able to improve decision making. And so understanding what types of decisions can and should be delegated to technology and what types of decisions should be left to humans. And in addition to that, thinking about how machines make decisions. So understanding what the input is, are they getting good information in which to inform decisions? And also understanding the process enough so that you can understand if the machine is functioning properly or giving you the correct output. So the second area that we're thinking about is the uniquely human skills, because as you think about what humans should do and what machines should do, we want our human leaders to be able to focus on those skills that they have that machines don't. And so those are things like creativity, critical thinking, empathy, being able to develop a culture in an organization. And so those are all sorts of things that we want to be able to make sure that those skills are strong in the leaders that we produce. So I'll just quickly mention some of how that impacts curriculum. So we do already have a very strong technical component in our curriculum through both the core, and then a large percentage of cadets will choose technical majors. But throughout both the core and the majors, we're kind of like rethinking what the focus areas are. West Point traditionally is a very heavily oriented engineering school, traditional engineering, and so as we move into the new age, engineering is still important, obviously, but we probably need to focus on some other areas as well. And just in recent years, we've had new majors added in cyber, in space science, in data science, things that we think are going to be more relevant in the coming years. And then in terms of the human skills side, one area that is particularly interesting is, and I think has been mentioned in here before, but the unique learning needs of Generation Z as they come through our system. So how do we capitalize on the strengths that this generation brings to the table while also helping to shore up maybe some of the weaknesses? And so how do we educate with this generation in ways that are most beneficial? So what we will do now is maybe focus on just a couple of areas. There's a lot of stuff going on right now in our curriculum and our pedagogy, but we'll just mention a couple here. Of course, I'm the math department, so of course I'm going to talk about data science. So we just added a new major, applied statistics and data science, and we're one of the first undergraduate universities to have such a major, so we're pretty excited about it. But really, the focus of this is to help those cadets who choose this major be capable of managing, collecting large data sets, understanding, analyzing, interpreting this data for decision makers. And so this is obviously, we've talked about data a lot today. It's a big, it's a big problem in our world, and having enough people to understand data, having a lot of data out there that we're not using. And so this is something that our cadets and faculty who are involved in this topic are already having an impact in the Army. They're doing research with Futures Command, with TRADOC, with Joint Special Operations Command, and a variety of really interesting projects. So hopefully that's something that we'll be able to continue to contribute to the Army, both at West Point and then as these graduates go out into the Army. So obviously not every cadet can be a math major or a data science major, so we also want to make sure that we're impacting all cadets. And so part of the core curriculum has always been a probability and statistics course, but we're really changing the focus of that right now to be more concentrating on helping every cadet to develop some basic statistical literacy, the ability to be intelligent consumers of data. We all know that when you're out there in a leadership position, you will have people presenting you with information, often backed up by statistics or data, and we think it's important that a leader who's making that decision can recognize the strengths and limitations of what data can tell them and use that information to make the best decision. So I will turn it over to Rebecca.
So I'm going to talk to you specifically about one of our academic program goals. We have 7 in total, but our lifelong learning program goal we've decided is a very important one that's actually really hard to assess and figure out where it's actually happening within our curriculum. So in looking really hard at this academic program goal, as you can see, we're trying to really highlight and instill within our cadets that when they leave the academy, they should continue to want to learn. And as we found is within a fairly regulated academic program, a lot of the willingness sometimes to learn independently seems to be low, let's just say. And so how do you instill this idea of really wanting to continue to learn after nobody is forcing you to do so? And that's also really hard to assess as part of a 4-year graduate program, because a lot of this is what happens after they leave. And so what we started to realize was that while certain disciplines, and I'll plug mine, which is foreign languages, tend to apply toward this idea of lifelong learning. Just because you've learned basic grammar, now you need to learn the culture, then you need to learn more grammar so that you can travel and immerse yourself. And so that is an important skill to have. We also feel that this skill can be applied to many different things. And as we've mentioned, reading in particular is one of these skills where we really feel we can make an impact. And so one of the changes that we've made is we've instigated the plebe book. So it's a required summer reading prior to coming. It is based on military history. We've used Washington's Crossing. And moving forward with that, it's still on the table. We are looking at creating some sort of self-directed learning experience, probably an online experience, so that cadets are responsible for showing that they understood the material and are also hopefully getting something out of it. And so in this way, it's something small, and we've only just started it, but we're hoping to see that by giving them the space to learn independently, they will actually then want to do so as they continue on through their careers. So going through these program goals, which you can see up here, we really realized that a lot of the places where we could make the most effort are these places that we have not necessarily worked into the curriculum. For example, if we don't give them a space to learn independently, how would we expect them to know how to do so? And so we're really emphasizing that potentially, as we move forward, I pulled out this quote, we're looking for more of this idea of habits of mind. It's something that as you repeat it, it becomes, as you say, a habit, and therefore you want to do it, especially if you find that it's something in your interest. I also like this quote because of the concept of the CI, which is the curiosity intelligence, because this is really the sort of intangible feeling that we're trying to inspire in our cadets, and yet how do you get there? And so I posit that it's not just cadets that need to develop in the creativity, that it's at times the educators themselves. We need to look at what we're doing. We might not want to teach what we were taught, because in 4 or 5 years, that's not what they're going to be experiencing when they're out. And so this curiosity intelligence isn't just for our students, it's for ourselves. And if we demonstrate and show that we are working to adapt just like we expect them to be able to adapt, we're hopefully setting the correct sort of role model. Finally then, you could see, as Colonel Hartley mentioned, we do have a very strong core academic program, and we find that that program is what will continue to make our future Army officers uniquely human. And so those are aspects that we find very important, that while they're learning the content and the specificity, and yes, we have a new cyber major, which is great, but who knows what the intelligence is going to be in 5 to 10 years. And so moving on, just my final slide, and I apologize for how small the lettering went. From the Department of Labor, these are the soft skills that we also are hoping to integrate within our core, within these experiences, because if you really develop these skills, we feel that we're really developing great leaders of character, which is ultimately what the mission of West Point is.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing. That's certainly a leading edge. And another person from West Point, we welcome Josh Bowen, who is the founder of 3x5 Leadership and is also a TAC at West Point. Josh?
Yeah, I guess kind of for everybody's context, what I get paid to do. I'm a tactical officer at West Point, so one of the 36 cadet companies. So I'm in charge of about 130 cadets from all 4 classes. While I'm in charge of it, I have a cadet company commander, so I don't really do a lot of commanding. It's more about a teaching, advising, and coaching role, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. And on the side beyond that, I also teach the military leadership course in support of West Point's Behavioral Sciences and Leadership Department, which is cadets' capstone course on the topic of leadership. But then as Jim was referencing, kind of my passion is to make people and organizations better through the lens of leader development. I primarily do that right now through that website, trying to provide a lot of different resources and ideas for people to apply within their organizations. I want to bring the conversation kind of down into the trenches for the educators and talk about, I guess, more of our direct relationships, interactions from pre-commissioning educators and cadets and future officers. By considering a few conditions surrounding our military and pre-commissioning sources, I argue that today's junior officers and field grade leaders of 2035 need to demonstrate 5 key leader qualities. Developing these leader qualities does not require sweeping institutional or curriculum changes, but can be done through the inclusion of a few small, deliberate developmental activities. I offer 7 as part of my research that can be easily incorporated to cadet education and training today. While the 5 leader qualities and proposed developmental activities are not directly achieved with or through the application of technology, many are important because of the technology challenges of our coming operating environments. Today I intend to discuss 3 environmental conditions, the 5 leader qualities, why they're important, as well as take a detailed look at 3 of the 7 proposed activities to engage those qualities. To start, there are 3 conditions I want to look at within our military and pre-commissioning sources that we must consider for context. First, our military relies on 3 primary levers to meet current operational demands. Those are readiness, manpower, and modernization. We have a long history of shifting from one lever to the next to remain ready, relevant, and effective in meeting those changing needs. Today, however, I argue our military is kind of pulling on all 3 levers pretty simultaneously and aggressively, which is a bit unprecedented. As a result, junior officers are entering our military where their superiors, company commanders and battalion field grades alike, don't have all the answers. And really that shouldn't be alarming, just more matter of fact reality. A second condition is the idea that our military needs officers equipped for and committed to the deliberate development of other leaders. This is incumbent in the Army's definition of leadership, which I show here, with our collective responsibility to improve our organizations and the nature of the military's up or out promotion system. Leaders have inherent responsibilities to develop the 2nd and 3rd generations of leaders to follow after them. The 3rd condition is the sensitive nature of cadets' transition from the institutional domain of development to the operational, as you can see in the Army's leader development model here. When cadets commission, they go from robust institutional development structures to their operational units, which, from my experience, can unfortunately often stagnate continued deliberate development. It is important to have new officers transition to the operational domain with a firm understanding of and commitment to self-development to mitigate that. Further, we need them to commission with the knowledge and ability to actively develop others now and as the next generation of field grade leaders in 2035. Considering these conditions, I propose that pre-commissioning educators focus on developing 5 key leader qualities in cadets. We need junior and future field grade leaders who are 1, adaptable. They're capable of leading, fighting, and winning in a variety of VUCA conditions, to include ones that are high or, conversely, with no technology saturation of the OE. 2, we need leaders who are able to lead teams with clear and effective vision and intent. Military leaders are faced with more demands than time and capacity allow. There's a lot of noise in our environments and in the day-to-day business of military operations. But our formations must be both effective and efficient in accomplishing those missions. So we need leaders who are able to set clear priorities and end states while managing prudent risk of what is not priority. Third, we need leaders who are capable of fostering team cultures of high engagement and empowerment. Technology and the speed of combat are preventing leaders from having all of the answers. We require effective teams to accomplish the missions. I argue that 21st century leadership is equating more and more to a sense of shared leadership within small teams. Leaders must cultivate team cultures of high member engagement and empowerment. Fourth, we need leaders who are committed to and capable of ethical decision-making. Technology and social media has led to not new concept, but still the strategic corporal effect, where any soldier, regardless of rank or echelon, is under a microscope and capable of strategic level impacts. And so we need leaders who are willing and able to do the right thing every time and everywhere. Fifth, I argue we need leaders who are humble. Pop culture leadership author Simon Sinek states that leadership is an education, and the best leaders view themselves as the students. Inherent to being adaptable and building engaged and empowered teams are leaders with growth mindsets who are committed as much to learning as they are teaching and giving guidance. So pre-commissioning educators and institutional leaders must begin targeting these qualities now in a variety of ways. We can do so through means that are generalizable across institutional contexts, that are low resource and low cost, sustainable, and transferable to the operational domain for cadets to take with them. These activities maximize the quality and quantity of cadet developmental touch points throughout their education. Ultimately, we aim to have cadets equipped and inspired to continue these into the operational domain for their own self-development, to develop soldiers and NCOs now, and to improve our tactical formations as field grade officers in 2035. As seen in the far left column, I offer 7 activities that I think educators can action now and how they target the 5 leader qualities, which are shown in the top row there. For today's discussion, I want to highlight 3 of those activities that are more educator and institutional leader-centric, as well as provide examples of how they are enacted in unique ways within a cadet company for consideration. First, cadets need quality and robust feedback loops throughout their education and training to develop self-awareness, ensure a realistic understanding of their performance, to improve their communication skills, and to foster their comfort and competence in giving and receiving feedback. To do this, cadets require education on the science of feedback and many opportunities to practice the art of it. I recommend educators implement a series of formal feedback loops within cadet curriculum that vary across the loop time length, the developmental focus, and the source. Loop time lengths should span from a near daily to each semester. These differing timelines target different developmental focuses, such as, at the largest scale, a cadet's overall potential to commission and be a successful leader, down to individual moments on how they behave as a member of a team. Further, feedback loops should come from a variety of sources up, down, and across the chain of command. Only top-down feedback loops are insufficient and even risk developing transactional, indifferent, or at worst, even toxic leaders. This holistic program of feedback within a cadet company becomes a system of multiple designed feedback loops. For example, I think at the most macro level, we could see cadets engage in a formal counseling per semester with a tactical officer or similar institutional leader, viewing the cadet as an emerging lieutenant and emphasizing unique points of feedback that lieutenant needs to best lead soldiers soon. That could be supported by more standard Army counseling processes within the cadet chain of command per semester, all reporting on cadets' abilities to perform their assigned duties. Moreover, we can leverage other feedback activities like peer coaching relationships, where peers routinely meet and discuss one another's critical area of leader improvement and set effective goals for growth together. This encourages peer-to-peer feedback through focused development while fostering higher levels of ownership and support across the chain of command. Lastly, organizational feedback can be rounded out with a system that enables cadets to give one another feedback based on a specific observation, no matter where they are in the chain of command. This emphasizes the most micro dimension of feedback, which is looking at cadets' in-the-moment behavior. Making the system anonymous can further increase psychological safety in giving others feedback, and it also removes the stigma of knowing the source of feedback for those receiving it. Overall, all of these feedback loops integrate to drastically improve cadets' self-awareness, leader performance, and many of our key leader qualities I discussed. The second activity to highlight includes teaching and using a model for developmental communication, shown here. I argue there are 5 types of developmental communication that includes leaders setting expectations, giving feedback on expectations and performance, as well as teaching, coaching, and mentoring. All 5 types have different developmental intentions. For example, a leader as teacher imparts new knowledge on cadets, providing them new ways of thinking. Coaching, however, calls the leader to rely on extensive questioning to challenge cadets to own their decision, instills self-sufficiency in them, and encourages the cadet to think through all consequences to ensure they enact complete, well-thought-out plans. Every interaction with a cadet is an opportunity for developmental communication. The 5 types can occur in formal settings, like a planned counseling session, or informally in unplanned moments throughout a day. Educators must leverage all 5 types based on the current situation and to target a cadet's or group's particular developmental needs. More broadly, this model develops cadets' own abilities in the 5 types over time. We need future military leaders capable in all types, and so cadets really need to start practicing now. Tomorrow's junior officers may highly rely on expectations and feedback early on, but as they transition to field grade ranks in 2035, they may turn to teaching, coaching, and mentoring more to accomplish more complex missions and build inter-organizational teams. Currently in my role as a tactical officer, I have opportunities to leverage all 5 types daily. For example, in my interactions with my cadet company commander, who is a math major at West Point, I resort to a coaching style to encourage his creativity, critical thinking, and self-sufficiency. I may teach a formal professional development class to my juniors on a topic like mission command to kind of build their knowledge in that area. Later, I could have a formal counseling session with one of my cadet platoon leaders where I offer relevant feedback on their performance thus far. Then, I might meet with a freshman and help them set developmental goals as a mentor, offering some added perspective and advice. Each of these types focus on a different developmental need based on the situation and the person, but all are necessary. And really, through my own consistent practice, I'm improving my developmental communication abilities for increased effectiveness in the future back in the operational force. Finally, I want to discuss something called tactical decision exercises. While this is not a new or innovative idea within our military, I think TDEs are experiencing a renewed energy with tactical level leaders today. They're simple exercises that leverage minimal resources like maps or terrain models and very specific scenarios that are purposely incomplete or ambiguous and time-bound. This creates simple, low-threat opportunities for cadets to deliberately practice timely decision-making, risk-taking, and even considering ethical dilemmas. While fundamentally focused on how a leader receives, processes, and applies information to make decisions, looking towards the future, TDEs might become more robust through the integration of augmented or virtual reality. Rather than simply being conducted on a map or a handmade model, we might integrate scenarios where a cadet dons a VR headset and immerses themselves in an exercise scenario to make decisions in real time. In time, I believe there is potential for pre-commissioning sources and even operational units to use biometric data from a VR headset during a TDE. This could help specifically train the individual on understanding their decision cycle, possibly understanding the influencing personal and environmental factors, and even recognizing biases in their thinking. In closing, I argue that several important military and institutional conditions require our future junior officers to demonstrate 5 key qualities: adaptability, the ability to lead with clear vision and intent, capable of developing highly engaged and empowered teams, committed to ethical decision-making, and leaders who are humble. Educators can develop these leader qualities by adapting and incorporating simple, low-resource activities into cadets' education and training now, similar to the ones proposed. In the end, we desire cadets to transition into our operational units more inspired and more equipped with the knowledge of how to continue their own self-development, how to effectively develop the soldiers and NCOs, and able to refine similar activities as field grade officers in 2035 to apply to the next generation of junior leaders. This type of grassroots developmental efforts keeps our formations engaged, informed, and ready, regardless of the challenges of our coming and changing operating environments. I appreciate your time and your consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. That certainly fit well with what's going on at West Point now, so hopefully y'all will continue to collaborate. Well, we're real pleased to have on our panel, I think the only panel with a cadet here. Pass that down. Cadet Kwok is in her final year and from South Korea. So we're real pleased to have you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jiyeon Kwak, a senior cadet from Korea Military Academy, as known as KMA. It is a great honor to have a presentation in front of you all, but I'm a little bit nervous because it's my first time having presentation in English. And also I'm the only undergraduate among the panels, so please excuse me if I make some mistakes. Then let's start with the introduction. There are unchanged but important issues of selection in various workplaces. Who to select? Most recruiters select candidates with GPA, but GPA cannot tell their job capabilities well. So we need to evaluate the other factors, but it is hard to find effective ways to evaluate it. Evaluate unseen aptitude. Human bias, evaluation error, distortion effect were the most common problems of a traditional job interview. This means the traditional job interview has some difficulty in improving reliability and validity. So AI interview is a new alternative for the traditional job interview. KMA has a two-phased entrance exam. The first phase is an exam for academics. It consists of 3 subjects: Korean, math, and English. The second phase is an intensive interview for those who pass the first exam. There are 3 to 4 interviewers for each interview room, for group discussions, psychological tasks, and so on. KMA can evaluate candidates in detail. However, time, budget, and trainings for the interviewers are the challenges to current interview. AI interview is a new trend which tries to recruit candidates with using AI technology. It has improved its fairness and accuracy in the interview assessment system. In accordance with the new trend, KMA decided to introduce AI interview system on cadet selection, and it chose Midas IT's AI interview system in air, which can evaluate candidates' external and internal elements. This is a picture taken during the KMA entrance exam. Candidates are on the AI interview at KMA lab. This diagram shows the procedure of AI interview. The first step is to enter URL and log in with the task code. Then candidates have to verify web camera and voice. Also, they have to register their faces. After all these steps, candidates go through basic questions, exploring questions, and situation questions. In addition, they have to play some games based on brain science. Yeah, and then finally they go through the deep structurized questions. There are 4 indexes in AI interview: performance capacity index, sociability index, organization stability index, and attraction index. The performance capacity index includes trust, value, passion, and strategy. You can see the sample AI interview recalls on the screen. If a candidate goes through the AI interview, the results will go to him or her, and also to the personnel manager. Purpose of this study is to examine the correlation among AI interview, KMA interview, and cadets leadership index. Also, through this study, I wanted to investigate the feasibility of AI interview in KMA cadet selection. 298 cadets completed KMA interview at the entrance exam and AI interview. KMA interview at the entrance exam was on July to September. 77th class cadets did it at 2016, and 78th class cadets did it at 2017. Both of them went through the AI interview at December 2018. I already explained the 2 measures, the KMA entrance exam and AI interview. And the third one, the third one, Cadets Leadership Index, is a composition of general academic grades and leadership competency during cadet life. General academic grades means the GPA, and leadership competency during cadet life is evaluated by cadets, tactical officers, and professors. Now I'll show you the results of my study. First, the correlation between KMA interview and AI interview. Sociability index of AI interview showed the highest correlation with KMA interview. And the psychological test of a KMA interview yield the highest correlation with AI interview. Second, the correlation between KMA interview and cadets leadership index. General academic grades correlate with the first and second entrance exam of KMA. The correlation between comprehensive evaluation of KMA interview and leadership competency is significant. So the correlation between KMA interview and cadets leadership index. Cadets with higher grade in performance capacity index reports higher levels of general academic grades. In addition, cadets with a higher score in total score, performance capacity index, sociability index, and organization stability index report higher levels of leadership competency. Finally, to determine if demographic data, KMA interview, and AI interview were significant predictors of cadets leadership index, we conducted a hierarchical multiple regression. This table shows the results of hierarchical multiple regression analysis for academic grades. After step 1, the demographic data didn't make a significant contribution. However, the total score of first KMA entrance exam and the cumulative scores accounted for 13.5% of the variance in step 2. After step 3, the trust and strategy factors made a significant contribution. Trust and strategy factors significantly and positively predicted the general academic grades. This table shows the results of hierarchical multiple regression about cadets leadership competency. Like the results of general academic grades, the demographic data didn't make a significant contribution. Also, as you can see on the screen, the KMA entrance exam didn't make a significant contribution. However, value and strategy factors significantly and positively predicted cadets leadership competency. Value and strategy factors accounted for 8.1% of the variance in step 3. The correlation between AI interview and KMA interview is generally low, but the psychological test of KMA interview yield the highest correlation with AI interview. This means the evaluation factors of AI interview and psychological test of KMA interview are similar. AI interview shows higher correlation with cadets leadership index than with general academic grades. In this case, AI interview could be useful for KMA cadet selection. With respect to AI interview, the factors examining trust and strategy are positive predictors of general academic grades. Also, I can find out the positive relationship between leadership competency and the factors for value and strategy in AI interview. However, there are some limitations in this study. First, the algorithm need to be developed. It is essential to customize AI interview algorithm for KMA, because AI interview algorithm is suitable for selecting talented candidates for workplaces. But KMA has to select candidates adequate for cadet life. Selecting an office worker and cadet is different. Customized algorithm can ensure higher predictive validity. Second, there are some security issues were an obstructive factor on this study. Because of the military security policy, KMA only provided limited data to Midas IT, the AI interview tool provider. Also, Midas IT did not open detailed scoring system to KMA due to their business policy. So there were 1 to 2 years of gap between KMA interview and AI interview. As I explained in the last slide, KMA interview was conducted in 2016 and 2017, but the AI interview was implemented in 2018. It means the possibility of results being changed by KMA education. To prove the feasibility of AI interview in KMA cadet selection in future studies, AI interview and KMA entrance exam have to be conducted concurrently. And since the AI interview results were produced in limited data and condition, future studies need to secure more data. Last but not least, sophisticated algorithms need to be developed so that KMA will be able to predict cadets' performance more accurately. This is the end of my presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks so much.
No, Midas IT is a Korean company that provide an AI interview system.
Very good, thank you. And now we're going to have Command Sergeant Major retired Jeff Mellinger. Jeff?
Hang on a second, Jeff. How many people in this room are potential officers or former officers? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you are former non-commissioned officers? Come on, Tony. All right. Jeff Mellinger's here for a reason. General Scales, I have to disagree with you a little bit, and we can get bloody about it at the icebreaker or whatever this evening. But it's invaluable, I think, to the education of officers that they have a platoon and they have a senior non-commissioned officer who, if he's good, which most of them are, is a mentor, someone to help guide them. And if you don't have that experience, you will almost certainly view soldiers and fire team leaders and platoons, as someone once said, wooden blocks. You need to understand what it means to wear a rucksack over the mountains at the National Training Center or in Afghanistan. You need to understand what it's like to slug through a swamp with a platoon. If you don't understand that, you're missing a great part of your education. Why would I disagree with that? Because, sir, you said warrant officers or master sergeants as platoon leaders. I didn't think you'd disagree, really, once I said that. But Jeff's here for a reason. I told him not to bring any slides, but I wanted a senior non-commissioned officer's perspective on the training of officers. And I will tell you, how many people here are ROTC graduates? Some of us, okay? I can tell you right now, I can remember the non-commissioned officers. I can remember only one captain. So that bond, that mentorship begins at the undergraduate level, and we need to remember that. It's an invaluable experience that I think those of us who've been through the mill kind of understand. So Jeff, I hope I didn't set the bar too high.
Thanks, sir. And I'm glad Joe Byerly took the initiative to tell the Billy Wells story, because I have a couple myself. So the pressure's off. Save it for this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and add perhaps a similar and different perspective at the same time. I spent just 3 months shy of 40 years on active duty. I was a draftee, and nobody ever told me I could go home, so I stayed and did the best I could for that time. I've just got some thoughts about this business of soldiering and AI and leadership development and so forth. So here we go. As we look at developing leaders, the future and its challenges are always the toughest challenge. If you know what you're preparing for, it's easy to do, but we never know what we're preparing for. And as was alluded to earlier, we write a lot of doctrine, we write a lot of manuals based on previous experience, and virtually none survive the first contact with the enemy, right? So we have to teach our soldiers and leaders how to think and how to think critically. It's easy, well, maybe it's not easy, to teach them rote and teach them how to regurgitate facts and figures and so on. It's not so easy to teach them how to work through the plethora of logistical challenges and leadership challenges that come with having to accomplish missions with soldiers that are cold, wet, hungry, tired, and missing home, and 1,000 other things. Anybody can be a leader when the sun's shining. It's a lot more difficult when things are not going well. We've gone from messengers, Genghis Khan and his Mangadai and shaving the heads, to tattoo maps on their heads so they could relay information to field commanders. And messengers remain our most secure means of communication, but now we've got computers and radios and video feeds and all sorts of information being digested and shoved at our young leaders and old leaders alike. We may have reached the point where they have sensory overload, and we've got to give them the latitude to turn off what they don't need. Most of us are pretty good at running multiple screens on a computer, but you can only focus on one thing at a time, and you may have a lot of other things running in your mind in the background, just as your computer or your data source is running things in the background. But at the end of the day, leaders have to make decisions based on what they know at the moment. So they've got to be able to filter out all the things that don't contribute to making those decisions. Think of the impact, myself. When I was a young soldier, one of the big technology advancements was going from a wind-up Timex to an electronic watch. You could set alarms. That was pretty cool until it was 2 in the morning, and the bad guys were coming down the trail, and the alarm went off. That technology wasn't so good at 2 a.m., was it? So just a thought. Cell phones and apps already have AI in them. You type things in and Google tells you what you're looking for. You're having a casual conversation in the living room and you turn on your phone and guess what's on sale? Something you just talked about. Social media, digital and video feeds. All of those things impact on our soldiers. We heard about the Arab Spring earlier. Remember how quickly that developed by use of Twitter? I never heard of Twitter, and all of a sudden they are moving people around and reporting information using a source that I was completely unaware of, but think about that. We are living in a time where I don't care where you go in the world, somebody has one of those things that we all have. And now the have-nots know exactly what they don't have. Think about that for just a second. I don't remember the numbers now. It was in the tens of thousands of cell phones prior to Operation Iraqi Freedom. Because they were owned and operated and controlled by the government. After Operation Iraqi Freedom, the possession and use of cell phones went through the roof, exponentially into the tens of millions. You can't hardly drive anywhere around the world now where there's not a satellite TV dish sitting outside a cinder block building or a mud hut or fill in the blank. So we have an abundance of information. What do you do with it? The Hong Kong protests. There was an app being used by the protesters where they could report what was going on with the police. The government of China didn't like that because they thought it was being used to avoid the police, and they asked for and received permission from Google to shut it down. Think about what just happened. A company that ostensibly is about freedom of information shut down an app at the request of a government. So how do we train soldiers to maintain their own level of confidence with all of that technology? It's easy to depend on it. If I took your cell phone away from you, could you find your way home tonight? Maybe. Could you find your way to my house? Probably not. Because Rand McNally doesn't even have my road on the map. So just think about that. Forest preservation and artificial intelligence. As we design these artificial intelligence capabilities, I hope we're taking into mind how to preserve the forest, how to keep soldiers from operating equipment in a hazardous manner that violates known and standards and procedures and policies, how to prevent accidents and negligence from occurring. My time as the multinational force Iraq SAR Major, a full 21% of our casualties were caused by negligence. I don't even use the word accident. Somebody did something they knew was wrong. Somebody saw it happening and didn't do what they should have done. 21%. So while you're working on your AI, take on that 21% and keep those letters from having to be written home to mom and dad, or brothers and sisters, wives, whatever it is. Technology is a tool, but it takes a human to employ it. Now, in the future, we're surely going to have physical and cognitive enhancements that are going to cause soldiers to think they may not have to maintain some of those skills. So, we heard about a map and compass today. Just a little anecdote. I got to Iraq as a multinational force Iraq Sergeant Major, and we had a thing called FBCB2. You probably know it as a Blue Force Tracker. That's quite interesting. I had paper maps for every square inch of that country and one map sheet outside the borders. It's just how I roll. And all my soldiers laughed at me. They said, oh, look at this old Sergeant Major here. Got all these maps and protractors and compasses and such. Sergeant Major, we got this Blue Force Tracker. And I said, what are you going to do when it goes down? Why would it go down? I don't know, maybe it gets shot. Maybe somebody cuts the wire, and the first IED we hit, every vehicle lost its FBCB2. We couldn't even call in a contact report. We weren't in bad shape, so I wasn't too worried about it, and I listened to my team leader fluster around for a couple of minutes and finally admit that he had to call me and ask where we were. He didn't forget that lesson, neither did any of the rest of them. Some of you are old enough to remember 1968 movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. The HAL 9000, a sentient computer, there to help that space crew do something, and eventually took over the ship. Couldn't happen here, right? How are we going to train soldiers of the future to maintain their levels of competence while they're aided and supplemented by technology? How do we maintain their ability to plan and execute at the tactical level when their electronics and AI systems failed, are spoofed, or denied? Think back to those protesters in Hong Kong had a service denied, an app that told them what was happening. Character, integrity, and value are part of our being, and we must believe in ourselves. The desire to win must come from within. You can't teach the will to win, but you can stimulate it and develop it. That's what we as leaders need to do. All of the AI and all of the electronic enhancements and the technology is wonderful, but if you don't have soldiers trained to use it and trained to use their own brains when it all goes apart, we'll have a problem. We can't forget the human domain as we develop our electronic systems, domains, and technology. We were talking earlier, or listened earlier, about AI is going to have more precise and ethical kinds of decisions, perhaps. I think back to a discussion I had with my younger brother, then a gunnery sergeant in the Marines, Beirut, Lebanon, 1983. And it didn't take long before the opposing team, shall we say, figured out that they could use human shields to get up close enough to fire RPGs at the Marines' positions. It didn't take them long to figure out they could run up with a group of kids and spray the Marine Guard with AK fire and then run off. Because the Marines weren't going to shoot back, as you heard earlier. We aren't going to shoot a young girl just because we can. So how do you resolve that for them using artificial intelligence and automatic weapons that are programmed to do the work for you? And I will finish with part of a speech from 12 May 1962. General Douglas MacArthur at West Point, where he was talking about all of the things that those cadets were going to be challenged with in the future, and all of the distractions, if you will, to their core purpose. And he finished that part of his speech by saying, "And through all this welter of change and development, your mission remains fixed, determined, inviolable. It is to win our wars." So everything we do, from AI to leader development, has to be aimed at winning our wars. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. So questions. I think we've got a few minutes for a couple of good questions.
Your presentation on developing leaders, I think it could have been given 30 years ago. What adjustments, if any, do we need for the age of AI, or are there no adjustments needed?
Yes, sir. I really struggle with that. I think as I was putting that proposal together, because I do agree, but I think it also gets at the essence of. That's not to say it was bad. Yeah. I think it's kind of back at the essence of what some of the other conversations have had, either through the presentations or the panels of, and very much what Sergeant Major was talking about. It is still human in the loop, and the speed of things, speed of combat, speed of decision making and stuff is shortening too, which I think is requiring, it's improving the amount of risk, and it's doing so at lower levels. And so I think platoon leaders are being faced with, and the things that they must consider, things that maybe even division level commanders were dealing with decades ago, where it's the most complex things where they have to think about the political, the economic, society level impacts of some of their decisions because they're under a microscope, because of the timeline of things. And I think platoon leaders are just really challenged with, things that I never even had to focus on or worry about in Afghanistan as a platoon leader back in 2012. So I don't know if that necessarily directly answers the question, but I think it's still some of these enduring things, but it's happening at lower levels and quicker for a lot of these young leaders.
Can I have a quick re-attack?
Yes, sir.
I think that a lot of what AI is intended to do and the early implications for DoD is decision support systems. And so are we thinking about how we train young leaders to use decision support systems and to get from them what they need in a decision support system that may be developed through some kind of neural network AI system?
Yes or no, I do agree. Just full transparency, I'm not a tech or cyber or anything like that expert. I try to sound. Yeah. And so by no means am I going to sit here and kind of spew off or espouse anything that I know about. The specific influence of technology and the AI and some of those decision loops. But I do agree it has to, I think the information overload is forcing some people to make decisions what I am or not listening to. And then part of my argument is why it's moving more towards small teams, whereas young platoon leader is not the sole source of, or even a platoon leader or platoon sergeant as the sole source of decision-making or subject matter expertise within what's happening in the environment. And they're having to rely on more people within their small team, either remotely displaced or altogether. So I think it's more about building those small teams, the cohesion, the ability, the processes that happen within that, as well as the ability to get the results out of that overall.
Yeah, not really directly at your question, sir, but just recently sitting in another panel, another place, we're talking about what is a squad. In the Army, it's 9 soldiers, and they aren't backing off or changing that. In the Marine Corps, they are now adding an additional soldier whose job is going to be to control the squad's UASs and UAVs. It's entirely foreseeable, in my opinion, that at some point in the future, not too distant, they're going to have to add somebody to manage information in the Army and the other services. So.
And just to add on, I think some of the messages we've heard today, along with Joe and the 3x5 with Josh, is this idea of critical thinking. Yeah, it's not a new idea. It's just it hadn't been done right. And as we're looking at our changing the curriculum and whatnot, you can change the curriculum, but how and what are we teaching? You know, and so we've got these institutions all across the nation that can't be changed on a dime because that's just the way we do it. But as I said, we've got to learn to see in new ways. And so should we have these institutions? Is there another way to train and develop our leaders of the future? Probably.
So Jim, enjoyed your briefing. Just a little bona fides. I've been doing this 45 years. And when I heard you say, that's the way we do it is just, that's not right. I don't know how you square that with best practices. And how can AI help us determine if how we do it is the right way to do it rather than just a habit?
Sure, and I think it goes back to the question that I was posing there, and that is, are we doing the job right? And we may be, and like I said, the metrics and all just might be right. But it's that ability to have everybody engage in that team to continue to analyze things. Just because it's an SOP is great, and that's what we're going to follow, but you've got to follow the SOP, and you've got to continually analyze that. And that's, I think...
How can AI test those SOPs?
Well, I'm not the expert either on AI. Sure, I think they can. I think because what they can do is they can reach back and look at data, they can look at best practices, and they can bring that together and show that this has been tried before, or if this is done, then that's going to happen, type of thing, and that can be used in the analysis to come up with the final decision. Good question. Thank you.
And perhaps just like we train in other settings, maybe we have to teach AI to do course of action analysis and to come up with not 2 in a throwaway, but 3 that are potentially to be used.
I've got a question. Lieutenant Colonel Casey Geist, I'm the professor of military science at Georgia Military College. One of the challenges that I'm dealing with is right now we have a generation that's coming into school that has had a smartphone their entire life. And so we're looking at ways to actually implement that technology into the classroom when many other institutions across the country are pushing the technology out, saying, that provides too much of a benefit to the individual, but why not bring it into the classroom, and why not build on that and make it more practical? Maybe this will help developing our leaders for AI.
Sure. I can go ahead and say I teach Portuguese at West Point, and we have a textbook that actually linked up with a very popular language app called Duolingo. So part of it is saying just get out there and look and see what's out there. The other half of that, though, is then you have to make them put away their phones and remember to take them back with them, just because when they bring them into the rooms, then you're opening up, as you can imagine, a whole new world. But we found that it's really useful because even if it's not 100% tied to the textbook, they find it enjoyable, and they always have it in their pocket. And if they have 10 minutes between class, they're sitting in the hallway and they're playing Duolingo, and it's like, I'm not going to say anything because then they'll stop. Because they do. A lot of times they find it fun and it's familiar. And so I think using any sort of app or activity or whatever that generates that genuine personal interest in the activity, I say go for it. And if it doesn't work, I mean, it doesn't work. But there's a lot out there, and I think there will continue to be a lot out there.
Yeah, and I think just another point is that we don't know what kind of technology is going to be out there in the future. And so I think anytime you can get students, cadets willing to try a new technology, I mean, that's just that particular thing that they're trying may not be here in 10 years, but the fact that they overcome that barrier of there's something new, I need to try to figure it out, I think that's good. So we definitely embrace technology in all aspects throughout the curriculum. So.
Yeah, and I would add that I think it's wonderful. I was most resistant to this thing in my pocket. I don't need no stinking smartphone. I have a hard time putting it away now because it is so valuable. Somebody says something. I've looked up several of the speakers' biographies and background and flipped through the pages of some of their books. So, you know, to Joe Byerly's point about getting smarter, I think I am a little bit through the course of the day in bits and pieces. But I would caution that along with that electronics, you never lose the ability to do the hard skills, to use a map and compass, to do PMCS, to, you know, whatever it is. You got to teach those in parallel because, you know, the James Bond movie where the British Navy got spoofed and they were in the wrong place thinking they were in the right place and everything went bad after that. They've got to be smart enough to look at whatever it is they have in their hand and recognize this is good information or it's spurious and I need to investigate further. So I think it's good, just temper it.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I just have a bone to pick with the two ladies here. You said it's important for carryover education to improve your professional development. Over 40 years of giving OPDs and reading groups and producing reading lists, I never remember doing any of those with my officers over a math or chemistry book. It's always been military history. That's what we do. And yet, in spite of what you said, we've taken the history of the military art at the military academy and cut it in half. So the United States Military Academy teaches 1 semester of military art. Can you please try to explain that to me?
Yes, sir. I'm really sorry that you don't remember any of your math, but so I would tell you that I think that I guess in defense of the rest of the curriculum, I think that what we really, I don't necessarily hope that students remember everything they learned in math, but I hope they remember how to think logically and solve problems. And so I think that certainly has value as well. I'm a big military history fan. I took a lot of extra courses as a cadet when I was there, so I absolutely agree that it has value. And I will tell you that the curriculum change that we went through a few years ago that cut back a history course, we've now added that back in this year. Well, not the same course, but they are taking, all of the plebes are taking a military history course for their first semester as a collective experience. So there's recognition of the value of military history. They still take a single semester Cal year and they take a semester plebe year. So they're slightly different courses. But I think the other thing that's going on is that they're trying to integrate military history throughout the curriculum in the sense that Rebecca mentioned the book that all the plebes read this year, Washington's Crossing, and all of the plebe courses are trying to integrate themes from that book within their course. Even in the math department, I'm teaching the plebe math this fall, and last week we had a group project that had them look at the Battle of Trenton and kind of look at the forces of Washington and the British forces and do some mathematical modeling about how those forces were arrayed and why Washington succeeded. So it is an attempt to kind of weave that back into the curriculum. There's cost for sure. I mean, like as part of that curriculum change, the core got smaller, not just history, but there's an English course, a math course, a science course, all were removed from the core. The reasoning behind that was to provide more disciplinary depth and choice for cadets throughout their curriculum. So there's definitely like pros and cons, and I think that I would probably fall on the side personally that I liked our old curriculum in many ways, but I definitely see the advantages of the new curriculum, and I think that that military history will of course be a part of the military academy always. So.
Let's give the panel a hand. And if I could ask you guys to just stay here for a minute, okay? At this time, I'd like to invite a few more of our international cadets up here to provide summaries of their poster sessions.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yalan Du from Taiwan. I majored in law in the Management College of National Defense University back in my country. My main focus on my poster is that the decision-making of military officers in the future age of AI. And since I believe that technologies are only useful when you know how to apply it, I got 3 main key points discussed in my poster based on my research to support my points. The first key is that AI should be an aid rather than decision makers. The second key is that AI can enhance military personnel's performance. The third key is that AI should be restricted and regulated in order to perform rightful military actions. So that's all about my poster. I will be grateful if you just come by and discuss with me. And thank you all for your patience in hearing my summaries about my poster. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Facundo Mona Ruiz of the National Military College from Argentina. I'm a senior cadet from the cavalry branch, and my poster is about leadership, adaptive leaders in my academy, and obviously in the age of AI. It's basically divided in 2 main parts. First of all, how we use AI for the development of adaptive leaders. Specifically, I chose an example of the Recon and Armored Center in my academy, which we get to use pretty much every week, and how we develop adaptive leaders through subjects and some experiences that the academy gives us. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from Japan. I'm cadet from National Defense Academy. I'm honored to participate in this symposium. I belong to Navy, and my major is Earth Science, Earth and Ocean Science. Japan have a lot of natural disasters, so I'm interested in my major, and I'm studying a lot now. Today, I'll summarize briefly in my poster about AI of Japan. I believe that Japan needs AI technology to solve problems about aging population and natural disasters. So if you have questions about Japan, please talk to me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Livia Bărsan from the Land Forces Academy of Romania. My specialization is management of organization, and my military branch is artillery and missiles. Autonomous military robots have revolutionized recent operational experience by allowing commanders to exert military power without risking combat casualties. The deployment of military robots and automation is less a matter of trust than it is tolerance, defined by the capacity of the soldiers to endure subjection to technology amidst controversy and difficulties. My poster aims at displaying the extent to which the downsides of automation impinge upon humanity's autonomy and how they will shape the future battlefield. I invite you to view my poster and discuss. Thank you.
And again, thank you for the last panel. That was great. And again, it's the diversity of thought that we bring here. It's the different perspectives. And now we have the perspective of the Department of Army G2, represented by Colonel Candice Frost. She's currently the Director of Foreign Intelligence in the Army Deputy Chief of Staff G2. As the Director of Foreign Intelligence, Colonel Frost provides current and estimative intelligence to the Secretariat and the Army staff. They also project future strategic environment to the Secretary of Army, Chief of Staff of the Army, Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, Army G2, and the Army Acquisition Executive. As the Director of Foreign Intelligence, Colonel Frost advises and provides foreign technical threat intelligence assessments in support of Army acquisition programs, science and technology efforts, and research and development programs. Colonel Frost received her commission from the United States Military Academy at West Point, branching into military intelligence. She has served at all levels of military intelligence, from tactical, operational to strategic, both in analysis and command. Most recently, after her battalion command, she completed a War College Fellowship at the Central Intelligence Agency. Colonel Frost's deployment experience includes Operation Enduring Freedom Afghanistan 2005 and 2011, and Stabilization Force in Bosnia 2002. Please welcome Colonel Frost.
All right, so my job is to provide lively intelligence to all of you, to keep you awake. I do understand the afternoon shift is a little more difficult. First joke up is that they are having the rock math person from West Point, that's right, give the entire speech on AI. If that isn't funny, that means I was the lowest in my class at West Point in mathematics, and I am now the speaker for the Army on AI. So anybody can do anything. The Army can transform you. But of course, I must start with the disclaimer that anything I shall state represents my own views, not the Department of Defense, and I'll keep going with disclaimers because I like to have lively comments. So if I do make any jokes at anyone's expense, I apologize. But the purpose of this speech really begins with the national security strategy, because all good things start at the top level, right? Sergeant Major, where are you? No, that's wrong. You should have said no. But the national security strategy's focus. Our effort is to really look at those countries. And because I deal with threat, we're going to talk about my two favorite, Russia and China. And I'm going to look at them with kind of a confluence of technical weapon systems, and then the threat, how we define threat, and last but not least, kind of the future of warfare. I've had my afternoon cup of coffee, you can tell, because I'm already iteratively speaking and rather lively. So hold on, buckle in, we're going to begin. The two near-peer threats that really heavily incorporate tech weapon systems are Russia. And Russia, thank you for our partner nations here that face Russia every day. I saw Georgia, we'll talk about your country. Russia does so in the gray zone. And they also rely much more on their regime to maintain stability and defend their nation by kind of understanding, gathering information about their external threats, and then attempting themselves to reassert their role as a great power in the world. The second is China. And China, as a rising power, has that potential to challenge the U.S. with their own territorial ambitions. Thank you, our student here from Taiwan. We can definitely talk. But both the East and then the South China Sea and the conflicts that are of potential there, and especially with the principles of freedom of navigation. So I'll start. I've got only 2 slides, which is actually a sin in the MI world. But I'll define first weapon systems, and they're the 3 big ones. Big data, cyber warfare, and the subject du jour, AI. We have seen quantitative and qualitative shifts since September 11th that would make our jaws drop. But big data, I'll begin with. And whoever owns the data owns the advantage. We know this in the Army alone. From in 1992, when we really started to put it in perspective, to have it was called back then, a multimedia message manager. That message capacity was about 30,000 messages a year. It has increased 1,000% to 2018, which is about 35 million messages per year. So if we had little, birds that used to fly messengers way back when, can you imagine the increase of just fecal matter? It's a joke. I'm trying, guys, trying to keep you awake. The afternoon's always rougher, and we have some serious faces. Thank you. We have some serious faces in here, Sergeant Major. So that's big data's number 1. Number 2, the weapon system, cyber warfare. Again, I want to define it. Network-based capabilities to disrupt, deny, degrade, manipulate, or destroy information resident in computers or on computer networks. But most importantly, we understand that this crypto cyber part, but Daniel Coates, the former U.S. Director of National Intelligence, really put it best when he talked about the cognitive pressure of cyber warfare on American citizens. See, there's a boundary between cyber warfare and hostile social manipulation. And we see Russia doing a fantastic job. We talk about books that we want to read. Peter Pomerantsev wrote 2 great books that I would highly, definitely our foreign partners here should read. Nothing is True and Everything is Possible is the first book, and then the second book is This Is Not Propaganda, Adventures in the War Against Reality. These books really talk to how Russia uses that cyber warfare, but also information advantage. And last but not least, the third tech weapon that we are tracking specifically is AI, and that's the entire point of this. Dr. Maddie and Nee spoke about it very well, gave a great definition. But when we look at AI, something you can watch, again, to supplant our ability to learn, there's a Frontline special that just came on a couple of weeks ago by the public broadcast system here in America. And it really talked about 5 different areas of AI. And it put it in very simplistic terms, but it also holistically kind of outlines the things that we will face in the future with AI. In the military, we define both strong AI and broad AI, but I'm going to cut it down into a couple of things. Really, machine learning and extrapolating patterns is the AI I'm going to talk about. Linguistic processing, it's great to have a foreign linguist here, but also how can we communicate successfully with another language. How to store information. AI is extremely important to the military in the fact that we are drawing strong and new conclusions. And then we've already spoken about, and I have a great picture up here of a Uran-9, robotics to manipulate objects and move them around. So where is this most applicable? And we've heard it already spoken about several times today, really in the urban battlefield. When you look about future locations and where wars could occur, AI-enabled ISR, I'm a military intelligence officer, so I have to speak about ISR in positive, glowing terms, right? I see a couple head nods, right? ISR solves everything. It increases the speed and accuracy of decision-making, always. It never tells a false answer, especially in the urban battlefield. Now I get the jokes. Okay. It produces an enormous amount of information, and that's kind of the problem with information data overload with AI. We acknowledge that, and we are trying in the MI world, my very small niche environment, to look at advances in high-fidelity sensing, image recognition, natural language processing, but we have to understand the data that is specific to that location, the demographics, social, economics, and logistical characteristics of whatever city that we could find ourselves in. In the Army, we really do see AI as accurate and timely intelligence about capabilities, location, and activities of the adversary, as well as the city's terrains, infrastructure, and population. It's really paramount to the success of urban warfare. And of course, as long as our phones are working and we can keep going, we'll be just fine, right? We won't have to pull out any paper maps, right, Sergeant Major? You're voting with me again. Okay, thank you. Okay, so here we go. My second. There you go. So this was the first slide. We are going to kind of talk about a couple of these things. In my job, I have to get things approved through 15 layers of bureaucracy because I work in the Pentagon. So these slides were approved. I apologize. I'm not going to talk about every specific thing on here, but my really favorite part is the bottom center of the slide. And that is near and dear to my heart, swarm theory. I love it. And why it is so important. I could highlight, like every time somebody has already spoken in this conference thus far about things, I almost wanted to go team. So when we talked about small little drones in the future warfare, we've seen it in Syria. We'll see it increasingly in the future. If we talk about the Navy and the ability to swarm a battleship or a fleet, that is huge. And how states could do this at a very low cost, we face this cognitively right now. So that kind of ties into the threats that we see in the future. Again, this is my personal speaking. This isn't approved and blessed off by the Department of Defense. But I want to explain kind of our threat of the future in 2 different ways. Capabilities and then intent. So capabilities are capabilities, capacity, and competency. That's one side. And then the intent is the how and the why. So diving in, we really understand we can study technology all day long, but if we don't consider the employment of that technology, it really divorces the means from the ends and risks placing the cart before the horse. So starting with capability. Capability is the ability to employ military force in a material, credible fashion. An example of this is China. As of 2017, the Chinese press has recruited 6,000 high-level recruits associated with key national programs. This is called the 1,000 Talents Program. And China targets U.S. soldiers, targets U.S. scholars with top-level research capabilities who hold intellectual property rights, key technologies, or patents in technological fields. So they are already building their 1,000 talents by the talents we have created, patented, and they're able to use that in the future. Again, I'm focusing on threat capabilities right now. The other thing that China does is they have 300,000 Chinese nationals annually attending U.S. universities or finding employment at U.S. national labs, innovation centers, incubators, and think tanks. What that allows them to do as a threat and their capability is they are in a material, credible fashion, ability to understand our own vulnerabilities. And this gives me a point to always put in a plug for STEM and why we need to assist in big data, cyber warfare, and AI with more STEM students. All of the scientists in here are getting very excited right now. I'm a social science major. Just want to point that out, too. Rock math, social science. Somehow I made it to Colonel. All right, capacity. See, jokes all around. Capacity, my second point with respect to threat. That is deploying, support, and sustaining SEG capability materials in military significant numbers. Again, I'm going back to Daniel Coates, who really says Russia's influence operations is already at capacity. We in the military like to put things in very neat, very logical manners, right? I will follow the SOP, step 1, step 2, step 3, right? My 5 points of contact. But Russia doesn't really see things that way, and their influence operations, when we look at phase and the way that they've done this, a lot of us want to say we're in phase 0, phase 1 with Russia. With respect to cyber, with respect to influence, they are probably in phase 3. And we, and definitely Estonia, Georgia, some of our Latvia, Lithuania, many of the Balkan states, you understand influence operations. You could probably speak to it better than I can up here. But Russia understands that it's a low-cost, relatively low-risk, and a deniable way to retaliate against adversaries. They are the most capable threat in this area, and we see the capacity. Now, the second one I'll talk to, China, with respect to threat, that's a contextual intelligence. And this is really the capacity of big data and AI that is ongoing. Paul Scharre discussed this a little bit. We know that there is a cadre of elite private technological firms with the capability of marshaling resources needed to deploy a major AI application at scale. We have already spoken about Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent competing with Google, Facebook, and Amazon. There are areas that they're continuing with respect to driverless cars. We see that. But there are also areas in the Department of Defense that we know there's conflict as well. China hosts a pressure of data network with domestic equipment all over the system. And we can see this right now in 5G if we don't understand. Huawei is attempting to write the rules. We wrote the rules of the internet, go US. Who's writing the rules of 5G? Well, China's taking that large step forward. And why this matters to our military is that they are beginning to set the standard that the world may have to apply to that standard. That will influence our military. China's 800 million internet users produce an order of magnitude more data fueling improvements in AI than their American counterparts. Emerson Brookings' question really pointed to that earlier today. And that's why I like to bring up the Belt and Road Initiative, because it's not all peace, love, and joy. There are points and facts about 5G that will directly impact us. And then competency, the ability. Wow, I'm sorry, I'm taking a long time with this, but I'm very passionate about it. The last part of the threat is competency. And this is the ability to efficiently and effectively use military operations. This goes back to Russia, really, and it's the cognitive process or the trustworthiness of information. We spoke about it already today when we look at our networks. can we really trust the information? We talked about the box. Can we trust the information that's coming to us? And if there's an ability for a threat to look at us and say, what are our vulnerabilities? We are America. We trust people. We're good at that. A handshake is what we need, right? Well, enemy threat vectors do understand that vulnerability, and they work within that. We are susceptible to deception and cognitive challenges. We definitely saw that quite frequently within our election systems, and China's paying attention to that too, because they are understanding the interconnectedness of our networked information and the characteristics of our cyberspace, and they're blurring those lines really between war and peace. We know this through how they've set forward their doctrine and what they're looking forward to in the future. Our question to ourselves we should have as Americans is, will we know when effective and efficient military operations are ongoing? And that's really tied into that last point of the threat that I made, which is respect to intent. Why and how actors act the way they do. This is a really wicked problem. Anybody from Boston gets that. But it's not linear, it's multidimensional. It's the intent of using big data, cyber, and AI in warfare that don't holistically transfer kind of into our threat paradigm. I can't draw you a great enemy course of action with respect to some of these things. But I can tell you that Putin has recently, a couple of years ago, stated that within artificial intelligence, the future of mankind rests, and whoever becomes a leader in this sphere will become the ruler in the world. If that doesn't motivate us to study it a bit more, when we look at presidents from other nations saying how important AI is, we should pay attention to that. President for life, President Xi of China, we really must ask ourselves on the flip side, what will happen if China becomes a peer competitor in the US and tech areas? They are near peer right now, but what happens if in some areas they become equalized? Is it possible to have a breakup of the internet among regional lines? And how will that impact us? And how will that impact us with our allies? We have to look at that. The People's Liberation Army has really focused on intelligentized warfare. It used to be information. Now they've changed their doctrine to intelligentized. They have reshaped their military units, modelings, programs, and operational styles and equipment, ultimately with respect to kind of disrupting the world order. Luckily, we're still doing pretty good, so go Team America. But how this goes together is really the implication, and that's what we're looking at here. The implications of warfighting in the future. The Army's big 6 priority weapon systems, sir, you spoke to that a little bit today, long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical. I work in the Pentagon. I have to say this. It's like, right? See, some of you understand. Air and missile defense, soldier lethality, they all require accurate and timely decisions for their applications. So that is the future of our Army and what we're setting in place right now. But what we have to understand with the threat of the future as well is that making sense of those terabytes and terabytes of information that's coming in, it requires an enhanced military intelligence and enhanced operators with full cognition that they will potentially become overwhelmed with a decision-making process. Thanks to AI, we can simplify, well, not we, but AI has a potential of simplifying some of those really complex decisions from information overload to focus where decisions really need to be made. So now I'm going to talk about the threat vectors and then how we see this in the future. So the influence of future-based predictions kind of on the threat. Within Russia, we really must ask ourselves, and we've seen it already, what is the ground? What are they defending the defendable? We know our allies and our partners well. Georgia specifically felt this in 2008 when they saw a Russian assault. They were supposedly suspected to have launched an assault where the country was going to war with each other, and then Georgia saw it again on the 28th of October in 2019. It harkened back to those previous cyber attacks. We are watching our peers experience this. We know that a U.S. social media company predicted in October of 2018 that the Russian Internet Research Agency would adapt and change its tactics. So the IRA, that's the Internet Agency, they have begun, even in America, to push unique message traffic specific to our communities. Cognitively, we are feeling this threat already, and it will continue into the future. Those unique messages included African Americans, liberals, conservatives, and others, and they pushed and they pulled them in different ways. This will begin to infect our ability in warfare as well. And this was also briefed at the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which identified categories of IRA-associated social media accounts. The IRA used these servers, but they masked their locations, and they targeted the U.S. during the 2016 U.S. presidential election, according to the FBI indictment of IRA actors. Now, the social media as well, those companies have noted attributions of malicious actors and challenging them due to the use of their proxy servers, VPNs, and other identity masking technologies. So it's not just social media itself and Facebook and Twitter, but it has an impact on warfare, and we've spoken about this all day. But how will they be able to use this? Because they are mastering this art and this technique of manipulation and information operations. Now, the expression of the Sanskrit treatise on statecraft from the 4th BC, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, really does come into play here. When we look at this new bipolar works with the confluence of the China and the U.S., what we are doing economically with respect to our trade wars right now will have lasting implications. Meanwhile, we can also look at Russia and the EU and what's gone on with Russia, Turkey's relationship with Russia, and how will that confluence with them and the contested areas really intensify security in Europe? How would it, sorry, I got off script there, an effort to intensify security in Europe to potentially unite Europe, Japan, and the U.S., and thus inviting a stronger alliance between China and Russia? It's a possibility, but luckily history comes into our favor. There is a tense relationship between China and Russia. Again, thanks to history, we do understand that them becoming best buddies isn't necessarily one of those things that's going to happen overnight. So China, let's move on to them. The PLA, or People's Liberation Army, has emphasized the development of the 3 warfare strategy. Their operational planning started in 2003, and it continues on forward with psychological warfare, public attention warfare, and legal warfare. And this is where the cyber influence kind of ties into. Their cyberspace domain as a platform provides opportunities for influence operations. I'm beating the dead horse here. We all understand that I'm putting some people to sleep. So, all right. So then let's look next. The value of moving first when we talk about the offense and AI. These are sectors of AI deployment and the size and the breadth of their deployment. China understands that AI favors the country that successfully applies this application first. But lucky to us, it's oftentimes short-lived. Right? There's a great defense when we look at cyber attacks. Usually someone comes in and is able to patch the system quickly. We look at warfare, that has an application. But the fact and the speed and scale of attacks could really increase with China. And that's why the Space Force isn't just a funny joke about space cadets, but there's a real and live threat with respect to China and Russia in space right now. We depend on networks, we depend on communications, and this will continue onto the field and into the future. So China may take the lead in the offense. And there are immense stores of data. They have enhanced algorithms, and there's so much behind AI. And we've also talked about, I'm sure we'll have an ethics discussion tomorrow, but China doesn't really worry about the privacy of their data. The quantity of global digital data that China is able to scrape together is likely, by next year, 44,000 exabytes. That is a huge amount of information. How you draw correlations, how you draw data from that, could truly favor them in the future, and that's why we look at China so much when I speak about AI. I do care about Russia too, though. I just want to let my TRADOC friends know that. So the solution, what is the solution? God, I wish I had it and I could look into that magic 8-ball and provide it to all of you, and you can invest in different companies, right? And invest in the way we train our soldiers for the future. A couple of things for the solution and the way we should train, and it's really not that far off from what we're training now. We do have to understand that we are moving from an industrial age to an information-based society that is truly akin to cavalry to the tank. We made this reference multiple times. But Jason Sherman even suggests the future battlefield, even closely at 2030, may consist of as few as 250 to 300 human soldiers and several thousand robotic systems of various sizes, functions with artillery, combat engineering units done by robots and human-robot teams. I don't know if we can say by 2030. That's really stretching it. And God bless, Russia tried. Thankfully for us, they gave a great demonstration in Syria. They showed spectacularly the use of UAVs and drones. We see that in many of our countries. but their automated tank system didn't do so well. So we're like, that's awesome. Thanks for showing us that. We appreciate it. And they went back to the drawing board. But we really understand that there's always a connection, and we can watch other countries succeed and fail in this, and then we do our own testing. But our solution is that we have to understand that there's always going to be a demand for command leadership and creative enabling intelligence functions working together to come up with solutions. Another solution that we've looked at specifically in the military is that the artificial cyber hunters who are really intelligent, autonomous, mobile, specializing, but also with a human in the loop, with active cyber defenses who will exist amongst an environment strife with blurred lines of conflicts. That's why there are so many lawyers in the loop, because there isn't a fine line between who is actually an individual and who is acting on behalf of a nation state. We deal with this conflict a lot within intelligence ourselves because of our Title 10, Title 50 authorities and what U.S. code and law has said. But AI and the quantum of information and big data and cloud computing, Internet of Things, it's a gathering place and it's a complex nature. And if there were a way for Congress to clearly write laws and focus on that, things would be great. But right now our political system isn't necessarily focused on AI, and they're focused on other things. And so we have to build a future of leaders who understand resiliency. And that's kind of when I kind of bang on the podium, this is the way that we are looking at this AI problem, and really the great point that is made here by the overall conference. How do we build soldiers for the future? Well, the good news is we're starting most of this. Tammy Duckworth did a ton of work on this. We brought it into the military about a decade ago, and we've continued with improving resiliency of leaders and soldiers. That is the Army's most valuable capability. It requires training, education, equipping, and supporting them to execute in intense and rigorous and complexity and also a very changing environment. Training that is definitely set up by TRADOC will include understanding influence campaigns. They'll integrate both AI in alignment with computational propaganda and the manipulation possibly of human minds to remain offensive in nature. They'll also look at the foresight of moving aggressively and addressing threats on multiple fronts. And last but not least, I must quote, of course, the National Defense Strategy in 2018, which states, in competition short of armed conflict, revisionist powers and rogue regimes are using corruption, predatory economic practices, propaganda, political subversion, proxies, and the threat or use of military force to change the facts on the grounds. The ethical implications of both gradual and disruptive technology innovations that could change civil relations, political power, and in the ways wars are waged are profound. Luckily, as stated already, the character of war may oftentimes changes, but the nature of war remains the same. So, as I end this, I again say my disclaimer, the views expressed here in this briefing are mine of the speaker and not of my employer, the Department of Defense. They are not to be construed as an official Department of the Army position unless so designated. When I spoke about security strategy, the NDS, the NSS, they're all on. The citation of the manufacturers or trade names does not constitute an official endorsement or approval of the use thereof. So now I'm open to your questions. Yeah, and when I wore the uniform, the lawyer said, you must read these things because you're in uniform and it's being taped. So I will answer your questions as Candice first.
Okay, questions. Okay, I'll start out.
I was going to say, wow, I went very quickly. I have a habit of that. Okay. Oh, dang it.
So here we've got our Director of Cyber, and we've got our Department Chair for Computer Science. So, given that we have these two experts in the room, what would your suggestions be to them on how to best prepare our students studying computer science, information systems, and cyber? How do you best prepare them to be ready to deal with some of the threats you've talked about?
I think the hardest thing with cyber and computer science is that people get locked into their silo and they understand. I have studied this one area, back when I my grandmother was a typist for Ronald Reagan, and she told me typing was very important. And then my parents were communications instructors. Can you tell it rubbed off? And they told me public speaking was really important. And then I tell my children understanding different viewpoints, but we got locked into what we were taught. And so in cyber, especially, and computer science, it's not just the certificate you received and when you left the academic institution. You have to have that continued learning. I think that's the benefit of online learning. So many of our now seniors in the Department of Defense are very gun shy of changing into online because it is different. The online platform and the way to educate ourselves, it's different. It's not necessarily as effective, but gosh, if isn't a great way to be able to communicate and to update people on the changing nature, whether it's of warfare or of crypto communication, or you can get a larger swath of people through online training. But you have to stay engaged in that field, and that's difficult when you work in a bureaucracy where you owe 25 OERs and you've got to make sure that TDY travel forms are submitted in time. The small little gnats that get at you, those are the things that if you don't understand the most important thing in what you do, especially when you wear this uniform, is to fight and win our nation wars, you're missing the point. So stay cognizant of your trade craft and also understand your specialty, because each of us, God bless the infantry. I don't understand how some infantry leaders are able, and I'm sorry, any of our maneuverists, apologize, I'm not just infantry, but aviators are important too, and so are artillery, okay? There you go. Does everyone, can I hit everyone to make everyone feel good now? Maneuverists, but they are cognitively asked to hold so many different pockets of information, and it is extremely difficult. So those of us in signals or military intelligence or other branches, our job is to not only stay relevant into what we were studied when I came in, Russia, many years ago, but I also have to adapt. And I have to be able to provide the maneuvers with the best information with respect to decision making. That's where AI helps so much, because it helps me refine that and shorten it. Somebody mentioned today, it's not just 2 adequate courses of action and a throwaway. We want 3 good courses of action. I want to be able to provide that decision maker with the best decision that he or she can make, and then also understand the vulnerabilities and the places that they can also possibly go astray. So that was a very long answer to a short question. There you go.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very informative. I had a question, and a couple of people have mentioned today with the increased, just the amount of data.
Yeah.
When I taught at NDU, I would always tell the seminar, you got to guard against that paralysis by analysis. Mm-hmm. You just get overwhelmed. How do you see AI helping to influence that battle space to try to make timely and efficient decisions without just getting pulled down into the muck?
There's a great book I really recommend, The Signal and the Noise. And how do you find that? I think really the NSA does a great job of you have got a huge data set, but you have to have that one line that someone speaks or says that is critical to us. There's a lot of noise out there. And when we instruct and we talk about critical thinking, especially in my world, you have got to be able to sift through thousands of reports and figure out what are those things that are most pertinent. The decision maker might not think it's important now, but if you understand the implications, the second, the third order effect. So the signal and the noise is one of those I really hit on. We miss oftentimes when we look at statistics, what is statistically relevant? And that's why big data and understanding mathematics is so important, because you can have a lot of information out there, especially in the cognitive sphere when we look at social media. There may be a lot of things thrown at us, but who's doing the throwing? And when I started seeing people are quoting RT on Facebook, I'm like, as an MI officer, I start shaking. How can you quote RT? You're a U.S. Army officer. But when you don't understand the source and you don't understand that person, 50 messages came in 1 minute, That was a signal I think a lot of people missed.
So, I was going to ask a question about 5G, but kind of preface it with thinking about it from the other side.
Yeah.
First year or two in Iraq, the way that they telegraphed where we were was by launching pigeons. So it didn't take long. If you saw a bunch of pigeons flying around, you knew that somebody had reported within several blocks of your location. And then very quickly, as I mentioned earlier, we went from tens of thousands of cell phones to millions, and they were able to communicate that way. Well, that also worked against the anti-Iraqi forces. They started cutting cell towers because their own people were reporting on them. And then we've gone back the other way. So now, with everybody in the world having a smart device, great exaggeration, but the reality is there's far more people out there watching everything that goes on and able to report it. And even if it's innocuous, it's a report.
Right.
The terrorists in a recent incident learned where the hostages were because they were reporting on Twitter, hey, I'm up on the 3rd floor in 323, there's 10 people. So what are we looking at, thinking about to either defeat that or deny the service for the opposing forces?
So the good news is the enemy does the same thing, and that's why we were able to understand the little green men that were a uniformed group from Wagner that came to the Ukraine to assert their presence in a certain area. We use it in both respects. Some of I'm trying to think in a very unclass manner how I answer your question. We are constantly in the development. I know one of the gentlemen up here was an ethical hacker. God, how cool is that to have on your resume? It's pretty cool. But we have aspects and measures for us to target the system in a very targeted way. I think we saw that our entire military has moved to precision strikes, and we do the same kind of thing within the cyber world. We try to do it within the confines of the law, and unfortunately we've had some Americans that have decided they want to spend the rest of their life in Russia and expose some of the things that may or may not have been done in the past. But there are very targeted ways that we as Americans attempt to influence and prevent messages like that from occurring. But we appreciate when the enemy announces publicly when they're in a certain area. It's a nice message to get, like pigeons, in flocks. Hello.
So, Colonel Frost, thanks for the awesome presentation. I had a question about the politicization of the cyber threat and professional military education. So a piece of the cyber threat is infrastructural cyber attacks, cybersecurity, and data exfiltration. That stuff's fairly apolitical, makes a lot of sense for the U.S. military to be involved in it. But our adversaries also invest significantly in political manipulation, political warfare, and influence operations. That stuff is inherently political.
Yes.
And traditionally, we at least teach a firewall between the U.S. military and domestic politics. I'm wondering, and I'm sorry, this is a tough one, but I'm wondering as we think ahead to future professional military education, how we instruct on the full spectrum of this threat while still respecting the tradition of civ-mil relations that we have here, or if we might be heading for cultural changes in that direction to meet this new threat environment.
I think we're probably within that threat environment right now. It is, and again, I will quote the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. They have already identified that using proprietary data in social media, we have seen that, and how we instruct understanding what that is, that whether it's critical thinking, whether it's understanding the biases, where your reports are coming from with respect to the susceptibility to deception. That is difficult. We are an apolitical force. We have stated that. That's why we raise our right hands to support and defend the Constitution. But the enemy, especially within information warfare, understands our cognitive process, is not only challenged by information, but we do it all the time, whether it's in Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, anything we do online, we leave a footprint. And the enemy uses that as a manner to target and look at potential vulnerabilities. They've done it within our society, and they will continue to do so. We just have to recognize that God bless democracy. It's really a good thing. And so I can respect your view, even though you may watch CNN, I may watch Fox, or you may watch, RT, and I'll question your sanity, but you may watch, many different ways to get news and information. But the fact that we respect each other's opinion, that's the best part of our military, I think, because we mesh ourselves, whether it's in the squad formation that we've already spoken about, whether it's in a military academy where there's somebody from every different state put together, and you've got to share small areas, right? Little groups of paratroopers running around. We are from all different backgrounds, and I think that is kind of the strength, to harken back to a slogan, the strength of our Army is our people. So the fact that we come from all different areas is important in an all-volunteer force, but we have to understand that there are going to be cognitive challenges with the untrustworthy information. And how we get to the heart of that, we just have to have that open discussion. Hopefully our academies are doing that, and our ROTC training programs are really talking about why these things are important. We've done it already with tough, integration in many different ways and respects. Now we have really the information. We could add another area to the Pentagon, right? The challenge of information. How do you discuss that? We've struck harder things. We've been able to overcome them. I just think we have to understand where we're getting that source from. So a roundabout. I have another question. All right. One more question. Great. From Cadet.
So you talked about an AI threat from nations such as Russia and China. Is there an AI threat from non-state actors such as terrorist groups who don't have as much access to advanced technology? If there is a threat, what would it look like?
So I definitely think we saw, not necessarily a threat, but we saw a heck of a great recruiting effort by ISIS using YouTube, using a platform. And it took tech companies a long time to get smart to the fact that they were videotaping murders and beheadings of citizens before they would take that down. So the fact that so much of the internet is almost free reign, it was like the cowboys and Indians. There was a lawlessness to it. Structure has come down on many of the U.S. companies. Companies in China we've already discussed. They're pretty locked down solid. But when we look at this, how can we as America work with our tech companies to prevent that from happening? Recruiting, whatever will replace ISIS now that ISIS is lifted and shifted, the thought will not go away. And the fact that we are understanding how they use tech with respect to inspiring people to act, that's tough. And Clint Watts wrote a really good book about kind of some of the work that he did on targeting those messages that are out there by terrorists. But it's an area the U.S. will continue to watch, and your generation will definitely face when you come into the service. The good news is there are plenty of cyber warriors out there that have the helm and are continuing to watch those areas. We will never get 100%, but we have to make sure we get pretty damn close. Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Just yet, okay? Okay, so, for our guest speakers, I got to tell you, it's been a very interesting discussion, including the non-attribution pieces. But I know you got to do that kind of thing. So, I don't know how big of a office you have in Washington.
Actually have an office in the Pentagon.
Hey, that's cool.
And this SCIF, you have to go through 5 layers of security.
Yeah, the SCIF. Well, I hope you have some scenic picture or something on one of the walls so you don't feel too enclosed. Yeah. But anyway, we have a small gift for you, and hopefully you have a place for it in your office. And
We greatly appreciate
Oh, that's wonderful.
you
Thank you
being
so
here.
much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Sure.
So the time you've all been waiting for, our final presentation. And this is something we've done new this year, and it was a science fiction contest that Dr. Wells came up with the idea, and we borrowed from mad scientists at TRADOC for the idea. But what the premise was we wanted a story, a science fiction story, focused on junior leadership and preparing junior leaders or pre-commissioning education with a ranger lieutenant focus taking the central role, given our history here at University of North Georgia. And so we had numerous submissions for this. It was a lot of fun reading through them. We had several great stories, but the winner of our contest this year is Colonel retired Gary Phillips. Gary, come on up. So we started the day with Chief Leverage, who I've known since '91. We end the day with Gary Phillips, who I've known at least since 2004. Another military intelligence professional, retired colonel, currently a senior executive service, is in the senior executive service, TRADOC G2. And Gary has been fundamental in standing up modeling and simulation. He worked for years on the operational environment threat and making that a document that is not only well read throughout the Army and throughout the other services and through our partners, but is highly valued and sought after. And so it's great to see the work that Jerry is still doing on that. So when we looked and we asked what we were looking for, it was a story that was creative, because we've talked about critical thinking all day. But it's that creative thinking that's just as important for officers, for anyone coming up, is who are those people who look outside and think, what if? And maybe taking something from the past and saying, what does that look like 30 years in the future? So again, we appreciate Gary's submission, and Gary's going to read his story to you.
So thank you, Sharon, and I want to thank University of North Georgia for having the contest, for having me here. So it's I'm the last speaker. I'm the only thing between you and happy hour. And of course, what's better than a story, right? I have 5 grandsons, so I thought I'd test the story on them. So I read the story to my 5 grandsons. And Cody said, Grandpa, if you're going to read that story for that long, you need to let them color. So if anyone here has got crayons, feel free to break them out. You may color while I tell the story. So, I've written a number of short science fiction stories, kind of testing the waters. And one thing about science fiction or any story is there's always a story about the story. So after I talked with Sharon some months ago, I was down in my basement, and I have a very large, full storeroom from 28 years, 6 months, 28 days of active duty, but who's counting? And there's a box from Desert Storm. And in that box, when I was a Brigade S3 in Desert Storm, in that box are letters to my wife and my parents. And both my parents are gone. They passed away. And I was digging through that box, and I found a letter to my mother that I'd written in 1991. And it gets a little emotional. I read the letter, and I left the storeroom and went out and said, I wonder what a letter from a soldier in 2050 would look like home. So I sat down at my computer in my basement, and I wrote a letter home. So I'm going to read you the letter home from a soldier sometime in the future. And if you would, use your imagination to put AI wherever you think it might fit in this story. Dear Mom, it's been a really bad week. I lost my friend Gilly. You remember him. I brought him home at Christmas after basic training. He rewired our home entertainment system. So it no longer caused those terrible headaches you got when you accessed those muscle memory dance moves you love so much. Gilly got hit by a brain tangler. It shorted out his neural connections. My heart hurts from the memory of him after it hit him. I'm really sorry to start this letter with bad news, but I know you understand that I can feel your love here even where I am in the Federated Politicos of Eurasia. My unit just got rotated out of the front lines near, and this part has been redacted by a sensor. Probably an artificial intelligence sensor. And this is the first time I've been allowed to re-energize my civilian neural interfaces. Connecting up to send this message nearly caused brain overload with all the distractions of the global human interface immediately available to me. I'd nearly forgotten all the skills I grew up with. The military interfaces are pretty Spartan compared to the GHI. They certainly don't have all the offerings to appeal to the less morally and ethically inclined that are available on the global human interface. You know, I think I still have some letting go to do about Gilly. I know you worry about me, so let me tell you what happens so you can understand what it's like at the front. Probably won't help the worry, but maybe you can take some comfort in at least knowing. It is so weird because the enemy is largely faceless, just like we are. With all the battle rattle we wear, the huge machines, the nano warriors, and a million freaking robots, their front lines make chaos at our house look calm. Sometimes I wonder if there is even a front line. No matter where you are in the battlefield, there is something that can hurt you. The best battles are when we send our robots to fight their robots. It's an amazing sight. Hundreds of machines moving 3 or 4 times faster than humans, blazing away at each other. Smoking piles of metal and steaming protoplastic neurosystems as far as the eye can see. At first, the captain put me in a robot control shelter. The RCS is pretty sweet. It's armored, air-conditioned, and has a great food reconstitutor. The RCS is pretty far back from where the robots fight, and my job was to monitor the robot units and ensure they were doing what they were supposed to do. I had to check on supplies like pyronite to power the batteries and ammunition. The RCS had a 4D printing shelter that was attached. I even had my own Air Force, resupply drones to carry the ammo forward and batteries to the robots. It was a sweet deal. Then the enemy screwed it all up. They started targeting the RCSs across my unit with homing EMP missiles. But that was the least of my worries. The fighting got so intense and fast-moving that none of us could keep up. Before I could change a robot unit's orders, they were dead. Some muckety-muck from on high told us to put all the robots in autonomous mode and abandon the shelters. It really sucked. Oh, I know, Mom, language. To put back on all that combat gear and leave that comfortable shelter. So that is how Gilly and I got stuck doing a patrol in that big city. The one I told you about in our last connection. You know, cities today are nothing like what you grew up in, Mom. Sure, still lots of people live there, and there are tall buildings. But cities of today are really more like alien organisms with humongous central nervous systems and all the odd body parts and organs one would expect in a living being, including a massive need for resources. In our case, the enemy had occupied the city as media central, as well as controlling the power and communications grid. The propaganda they were spewing out was really bad. The worst part is it was believable. Even I had a tough time sorting out the truth from the lies. The deep fake news videos were incredibly realistic and accurate enough that Gilly and I started wondering if we were fighting on the right side. I mean, not really, but imagining the U.S. Armed Forces units were capable of such inhumane things really made us think long and hard about what we had to do. The order came down to send 2 battalions of heavy mech robotic forces with supporting light robotic skimmers as skirmishers. Supporting fires were provided by a cohort of electro-optic jammers, encephalographic disruptors, and a swarm of drones carrying wire virus. Basically, wire virus is a bacteria that eats insulation on wires and carbon switches on quantum computing devices. Gilly and I were assigned a platoon of the heavy mech robots to control. The plan was to go in heavy with the skimmers taking out the snipers and providing target intelligence for on all the enemy fire support systems. Heavy mech robots would roll up and destroy defensive positions and seize the media complex. The second phase of the operation was to move north and regain control of power production and the distribution compound as quickly as possible. Well, Mom, as I'm sure you can guess, the plan did not last very long. Before we could even gain full control of our robotic forces,
the enemy began using a technology we'd never seen. Long-range remote devices that came firing in and looked like hockey pucks. They short-circuited a person's central nervous system. These little hockey pucks started falling out of the sky, and we immediately reached for our helmet shields. We powered them up and hoped it worked as well as the manufacturer advertised. Well, Mom, it kind of did. All I got was a nosebleed and a pretty bad headache. But Gilly, Mom, it looked like he got the low-bidder helmet shield. I heard a loud snapping noise, smelled electrical burn, and Gilly was on the floor flopping around like a fish out of water. He was making terrible noises, and then he died. That was it. He was gone. Our unit suffered many human casualties, but the robots were unaffected. And in autonomous mode, they only killed 2,000 or 3,000 civilians in the process of clearing the city. Someone higher apparently thought that butcher's bill was okay. Or worse, maybe they didn't even know. Was it worth it? Hell, I know Mom language. I just don't know. Even robots don't change the nature of war. It is still ugly, violent, and unpredictable. Anyone who thinks that technology can produce a clean war, where destruction is limited to robotics and robotic combatants, misunderstands human nature. War is fundamentally about coercion, and one cannot threaten a robot with pain or death. In the end, humans must suffer for any war to reach its conclusion. So, Mom, you know I'm not a bitter person, but there has to be a better way. Love, Urger.
Okay, so just so you know, this competition had an award with it. It's not the coin, all right? There's a $500 check that awaits you.
Which SJA approved, by the way.
Lawyers in the house.
Yeah. I have an SJA letter that says I'm accepted.
There you go. But I tell you what, that was an awesome story.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate your presence here, and hope to continue on tomorrow with some more discussions.